Okay.
Hi, this is Mark Arnold, and it's another episode of Fun Ideas Podcast. And we have a returning author slash historian, Greg Ehrbar, but this is now on video, so now we can see what he looks like. Hey, how are
Hey,
you today, sir?
good. Hey, you could do the Scooby Doo guest star, like it's the author historian Greg Ehrbar, and every time you're searching for me, you can Greg Ehrbar. Where are you, Greg Ehrbar? You know, like Jerry Reed, Jerry Reed, Pretty Mary stuff.
So, as we were discussing before we started, we're going to talk a little bit about Willy Wonka, but you know so many things, we probably won't even stay on the subject. So it's like, um, which is very fine. You know, a lot of times, I just want a chat with different people that I don't get to talk to for, a while. Like we have these meetings every week or so with Nick Santa Maria, but it's like we're always kind of talking with him, and we never kind of talk with each other much. So I
You missed
appreciate
the
you
match
coming on the
game.
show.
He
What?
has some kind of a setup now. I guess you can do a Zoom where you're on like this match game like thing where your head is above like each of the things. And I'm saying, what is it going to be Hollywood Squares next week? I Those who Zoom, check out the crazy ways you can do Zooms now because
Hmm,
they can put you on this like game show set, I guess.
interesting. This is Zoom, but I haven't experimented recently. So anyway, let's talk a little bit about Willy Wonka. So how did you become a Wonka fan?
Oh, you know what? It goes all the way back to the book. I don't want to date myself, but I became a fan of the book the moment I read, I'd say about two chapters. I think when I got to the part where they said no matter how fast his father could screw the caps on the toothpaste tubes, he just couldn't make enough money. And I thought, boy, this guy knows how to turn a phrase. Actually, Roald Dahl's first book I read was The Magic Finger, which creeped me out like crazy. Uh, I thought, this guy, what? Why is this book in a library? This is like the Twilight Zone. This guy, and it turns out he wrote several of the most famous Alfred Hitchcock Presents episodes, which is no surprise.
Hmm.
Not the nicest guy in the world. We won't go into that, but not a very nice man. But his attitude and his strange background is all in his books, and I think it said something to kids that every author nowadays has copied. I mean, all the you can just tell that,
Yeah.
oh wow, this is so Roald Dahl. It's he's like the 20th century Lewis Carroll
Hmm.
because there's something insane about his books. Magic Finger, I don't know if anybody's read it, but it's a picture book with text. It's not a novel, and it's like Carrie. It's about a school age girl who, when she gets mad, points her magic finger, and something like weird happens to them. And I don't know if it's supposed to be funny or not, but the illustrations, I think it's William Penet Dubois, are creepy too. And her teacher, yells at her in class, so she points her magic finger, um, and the image of her teacher is scary, and it says hold this page up to bright light. So if you hold just the page up, you can see the other side of the page, and she turns her into a cat. um, but it's like Lights Out. There was an episode called Cat Wife with Boris Karloff that's very creepy. That's what it's like. And then he turns a family, I guess it was anti-hunting, because I guess his father used to take him hunting or something.
Hmm.
But this family are going hunting, and then she turns them into birds or makes them bird size or something. So they learn to be compassionate about birds. Um, so that's the second half of the book. Anyway, I looked for Roald Dahl uh, other books, and around the same time, when he was married to Patricia Neal, the Oscar-winning actress, and she was doing Maxim commercials. My husband loves my coffee, and I use Maxim.
I
I
don't even remember that. I mean,
Oh, you don't remember her doing the Maxim?
the earliest thing I remember her on is probably the Homecoming. The Waltons
Yeah, it was a
prequel.
little after that. It was a little
Yeah.
after.
Okay.
But when I read Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, it was like you know when you hear a piece of music, see a film, or read a book, and you go, "Wow, this is real. This is something that's just beyond anything else. This is an instant. I hate the phrase instant classic, but that's what it is." And it and it's like the abominable Dr. Phibes for kids. These horrible things. And when the and I actually read it to my fourth grade class, in parts. In Cub Scouts, I told the story in Cub Scouts because I have the book with me, and we met on in the evenings. And I missed the Ghost of Mrs. Muir. That was the downside of Cub Scouts. It's like missed it. And it's still not on DVD. Gosh, I wonder who owns 20th Century Fox, who could put it on DVD. Wonderful family show.
Disney.
Yeah. And Nanny and the Professor, other wonderful family show that could go on DVD. So we're sidetracking as
Yes.
you predict.
Well, let me ask this. Okay, so that first book I never heard of before, The Magic Finger, but I know Willy Wonka. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is the name of the book. Charlie was the first Roald Dahl book that I read, and I think I read it after seeing the film because I saw the film when it first came out. I was 4, and I could read then, so they probably got me the book shortly thereafter because that was the very first one. But I never read any Roald Dahl books in any particular order. So, I mean, in short order, I read James and the Giant Peach, and they had the Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator, and somewhere along the line, Matilda came out, and The Witches, and I just read these things when they came out. But, I never went back and said, oh, I missed this one or whatever. I just remember. And then, I see certain film adaptations, and they're kind of like, except Willy Wonka was always like, even though I know it wasn't exactly like the book. You mentioned the father who's absent in the movie, and the toothpaste tube factory, which I always found a very odd job for a grown man to have. I'm not saying anybody can't work in a factory. It just the idea of that's all you do all day. It's like just twisting the tube.
Well, it's very British, it's completely absurd. That's the Monty Python aspect of his books.
I think I didn't get that when I first read it, so I'm like, does somebody actually do that? I was taking it too literal. Doesn't mind that boys are getting sucked into chocolate pipes and all sorts of other weird things, and there's a room with little squirrels, and unlike in the movie again, making holiday treats or whatever, and I'm like, it's like,
yeah,
but that toothpaste cap thing, that was weird. I don't know. Anyway.
It's funny how that leapt out at you and I at the
So,
now I was excited when the movie was going to be announced, and the way probably most of us found out was because of the Captain Crunch commercials.
I would think so. I don't know the chain of events. I know I saw it when it first came out because it came out around this time in 1971. I think the end of June, if memory serves, and but I think I saw it in July of 71. It wasn't like we were never a family. We gotta go the first day, like everybody does nowadays. And contrary to everything I ever read, and you could tell me your experience, the theater was packed. There was tons of people. It wasn't just kids; it was whole families and everybody. Granted, I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is like movie capital of the world. They'll go see anything. Movies that flop nationwide will be a hit in San Jose, California. So what was your experience of seeing it then?
I remember when it came out, there was the Captain Crunch commercials with a Prime thing where you could order the chocolate making kit. It was basically taking Tootsie Rolls and squeezing them into molds and pretending you were making Wonka bars, but that's really what it kind of was in a way. Oh no, actually, no. Was it, or were you actually melting?
You were actually melting chocolate. I eventually did get a kit. I didn't get one way back in the day, but I got one cheap finally about in the 90s. Somebody sold it to me, like maybe it was even later than that. for like $20, and I go, wow, this guy doesn't know what he has, because usually I see him for hundreds.
Yeah,
And they had everything. It had the little molds and everything. And the
yeah,
odd
it was.
part, it has like Quisp and Captain Crunch in there, which they weren't in the movie, Anyway.
Well, I think if you look at if the opening titles, and many of us know the titles by heart, even
Oh yeah,
the Quaker Oats Company underwrote it, and
of
so
course,
they paid for a lot of it. So there was a whole, as they say now, synergy deal. And I remember the candy bars that they put out, and they were different than the Sun-Aid sweet tarts kind of candies that are still around. And then for a brief time, there were Wonka bars, I think Nestle made with graham cracker in them that were really good. And they're not more. But the Quaker stuff, they had Oompas, which were kind of like Reese's Pieces.
yeah,
And they had Scrumdiddlyumptious.
yeah,
No, Scrumdiddlyumptious was a bar, but it wasn't huge like in the movie.
yeah.
It was a smaller bar. But they did do it. They just, if you weren't, the fact is, in the 60s and 70s, if the movie didn't have Disney on it, it people saw the Disney brand as, we got to see it. We know it's okay for the kids. It's a known quantity. I think with some parents, even then, because I read about Ron Miller getting letters. Treasure Island was. I know I'm sidetracking, but Treasure Island was cut for the violence because they got letters. So Disney was getting complaints even then about the movies being too scary. It's one of the reasons Mickey Mouse became so bland, is because
Right.
he suddenly couldn't do anything. And quite frankly, so did Bugs Bunny, because I still can't deal with that episode, that cartoon where he says, "Gee, Daffy, what gives?" It's like, Bugs wouldn't say that, and yet it's Mel Blanc. Anyway, back to Willy Wonka. When it came out, there were these interstitials after, like, the network movie, these 16 millimeter little documentaries about a film that was being made. And they were made by this Robin's Nest company. And there was one about Oliver. I think there was one about Scrooge. And there were a couple of them about Willy Wonka, because I remember the seeing Roald Dahl with his bald but long hair in the back,
Right.
and she
Yeah.
kind of looks, and I think it was called One Man's Pure Imagination was the name of the short film. But instead of cutting the films or lengthening them with commercials, they put these interstitials in,
Right.
and
I remember those.
and they were cool. So that was another way, and there were spots for it when it opened. The general consensus is it's creepy and weird, and I knew that, but my parents didn't, and the general public didn't, and they didn't quite know what to make of it. I compare it to the way Alice in Wonderland was received 20 years earlier, and that was a Disney film. People knew Alice in Wonderland, but it hadn't really been made into a feature since the 1933 one,
Right.
which was also odd.
Which I
And
found very creepy.
yeah, it is
Still
creepy.
do.
It is
Anyway.
very strange. It's kind of wonderful, but it is odd. I mean, it's like, but the Walt Disney Alice is a really faithful adaptation of both books. Um, and actually, like Willy Wonka, is a beloved, esteemed classic that people don't realize was not successful originally.
Right.
But it's a difficult book to make into a film, and the Tim Burton version changed the book. Any successful version changes the book by putting in a subplot or a story thread. Book doesn't have it; it's a dream. Willy Wonka is a series of events, and it's like two movies. The first half is all about Charlie, and which is wonderful because it gets you to really root for Charlie, and Peter Ostrom is so good in it. And how lucky they were to get a child actor who could do the Dorothy kind of thing that you really root for, and not be whiny or acty. He's just so good. And the second half of the movie is the tour of the factory and this sort of wildly satiric. I mean, the first half satiric too, but the second half is is weird. You know,
Yeah.
it's like Red Ann and Andy, a musical adventure. First half, lots of singing, lots of cute dollies. Second half, Yellow Submarine. You know,
Yeah. It's
and
funny that you say Yellow Submarine because as a kid, I think Yellow Submarine first appeared on TV in 71. It might have been a little bit later. Is that right? And so
I think you're right. I think it was 71, 72. I
yeah, so
think
I saw Willy Wonka in the theater. I saw Yellow Submarine on TV the first time around the same year and a half point. And I did find a real similarity of just being very strange films, but I love both of them. So, you know,
well, and also Roald Dahl wrote or co-wrote the screenplay to Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, and
oh yeah,
that's
I
like
saw that one too. Not in the theater because I was a little bit young, but that probably aired on TV pretty early in the
it
70s too, you know. So,
it did, and it was similar to Willy Wonka in that it was two movies also. First half, yeah, car. Second half was much more broad, much more cartoony, with the crazy spies and the Bulgaria whole thing. It was like two movies. That was the thing. Doctor Dolittle was like that too.
yeah.
First half was like the
I
second
get
half.
them all kind of mixed up a little bit in my
Yeah.
mind
Well,
because
that was the
they all have
era.
kind of similar kind of psychedelia going on. You know?
Yeah, that was the era. They were all trying to do another Mary Poppins or Sound of Music.
Yeah.
I don't know if by 1971 they thought they had that kind of audience anymore, but I remember going to any kids movie, especially a Disney movie, whether it was a comedy or it was True Life, Best of the True Life Adventures, or whatever it was, especially if it was an animated feature. The
Yeah.
line would be around the theater into the parking lot. The lines were long. It was always a huge event because there wasn't the proliferation like there is. There was no 24-hour cartoons and 24-hour kid things and 24-hour tween comedies and 24-hour this and now unlimited streaming and DVDs and tapes. There was just, to me, there was records.
Yeah.
That's, I had unlimited use of something that I liked, but there was no, you couldn't watch even your favorite shows. You waited till like Greg
Right.
Gilligan episode was on, you liked, or that Bewitched with where they were, they lost their powers and made the frozen bananas. It's like, oh, I know this one.
Or
You
you
know,
buy a comic book or something because, at least that was kind of like a
that was
piece
your
of the show. Although there
oh,
was never a Willy Wonka comic.
that
Anyway,
dude. There was not, and there was very, very little merchandise, and that's because of Doctor Dolittle and Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. I think because we owe Doctor Dolittle, especially uh, the George Lucas definitely does, and Disney does, because without Doctor Dolittle, the merchandise rights were signed away to Lucas because they overdid it with Doctor Dolittle, and the merchandise didn't sell well, and they just said, "Oh, who cares? Is this a little space movie? Sure." And the overwhelming margin of profit on the Lucasfilm products is the stuff, you know. So there you go. Willy Wonka didn't have really much of anything. By that time, they were skittish,
mhm.
I think. So the movie was not. It was received with mixed reviews. I remember Life magazine had kind of a picture page, um, but people didn't know what to make of it. And the local critic where I lived uh, was not thrilled with it. So I remember my parents' reactions. What is it with this movie? What kind of movie is this? It sounds so.
Now, where
And it's
were you? Where are we? Where
I,
did you?
I was living in South Florida, in the
Okay.
Miami Lauderdale area, and it wasn't. It wasn't. Well, I remember when it came, that's when it came out. So I remember seeing the soundtrack album in the store, but I didn't see the film until it played at the dollar matinee. That's the surprises people, is it was not a hit
Mhm.
and it was not beloved. And until it was on TV, and I'm going to say 1975 was when it premiered on NBC, it was a lost, obscure film that if you were lucky would hit the dollar matinee.
Yeah.
And when I first saw it, I'd heard the album and I bought the album, and
Mhm.
it was discontinued.
Right.
Uh, and the album is weird. Again, side one's nothing like side two.
Right.
And the boat ride, when you haven't seen the boat ride is weird enough in the movie. When you just listen to it in stereo, like my sister was very young, and she things could scare her in movies and TV shows. So when it played at the matinee, I didn't bring her. But I remember loving the movie, calling my parents saying, if you want to bring her for the 3 o'clock show, it's wonderful. Well, it was too late for that. But I loved it. And I thought, like you, I think in some ways the movie improved on the book because it took the cruel edge off of
Yeah.
a lot of, especially the stuff Roald Dahl hated, which was the ending where
Yeah.
he said, he said, I'm giving you the factory, but the warmth, Gene Wilder's performance, who at first I thought, Gene Wilder, really?
Yeah.
But he was so good. And the overall film, it was just great. And when it was on NBC, I remembered my parents being sort of ambivalent about it. But after they saw it, they said, I don't know. No, this is wonderful. This is great. It became one of my dad's favorite movies. You know. And I think it's just one of those things. And if you were to tell me in 1972, 73, that when we lost Gene Wilder, the image of Willy Wonka would be on the cover of all the magazines, I would never have imagined, because this was the era of, Young Frankenstein and The Woman in Red. And he was making these more sophisticated movies. And Willy Wonka was not something he even brought up in
Right.
conversation. Merv never, ooh, Willy Wonka, movie, it was never, it
Oh.
was, and you'd wait
Well, I
because
didn't expect him to. When Gene Wilder was doing all those Mel Brooks films and all those partnerships with Richard Pryor, I figured, he just did a one-off kids film, big deal.
yeah,
Different actors do that, but the odd part for me was just how it. I mean, I kind of know the reason now, which you can kind of go into, but it kind of just basically disappeared for about a decade. Just gone. It was on TV a couple times, and then nothing. And then I what I know is that you know Paramount ceased distributing it. It went over to Warner Brothers, something to do with the Wolper company, and Quaker quit doing the candy, and that went to Nestle, and then other people, and so all that transition basically put it on the shelf, and nobody cared about it. And the first time I heard about it again was about 1981. A theater got a copy of it and was going to show it as a kids matinee, and I was like 15 at that point. Maybe it was like 82, 83, but early 80s. And I asked my mom, can we go down and see it, because it wasn't like right close by, it was like an hour's drive. And she says, okay. And well, bring your brother. My brother's 7 years younger. He had never seen it, so he loved it too. He thought it was great. So and I was worried, because I don't know if you've gone through this, other people have gone through this. There's something when you're a little kid, you go, this is the greatest thing ever, and then you see it as an adult and you go, ugh, why did I like that? Fortunately, I've actually been pretty good. There's very, very few things. If I didn't like it as a kid, I probably don't like it now, or I probably like it better just out of nostalgia's sake than I did as a kid. But if I loved it, I usually still love it. So
yeah, I'm that way too. There are only a handful of things that I can look at and say, yeah, that isn't as magnificent as I recall it, but I still have a fondness for it, and just put myself in that, 6 or 7 year old and say, I remember how I felt when I saw it. But I don't find it horrible. But there are some things that, yeah, same thing, that just absolutely, I loved it then, love it now. And there are some things just like you said, that I could have taken or left, but I've grown to really like,
yeah,
um,
I'll give
because
you an example. It's like Sid and Marty Krofft stuff. My sister loved that stuff, and I was like, "Get that Freddie the Flute off the TV! He's so creepy," And I didn't like it, but I watched it because my sister's older, so she had control of the TV. And so I put up with all that Sid and Marty Krofft stuff. The only one I kind of liked was Land of the Lost, which I found out later I liked because a lot of the people wrote for Star Trek, which, hey,
Mhm.
but I didn't know that as a kid. I just said, hey, this one's not so stupid as all those other ones. Now I
Well,
like all the Sid and Marty Krofft because it's like I get what they were trying to do, but as a kid, it just said looked too flippin' weird. I was just like, get this off my TV. you know?
I loved the Sid and Marty Krofft stuff, and there's an example of I loved HR Puffin stuff from. In fact, I didn't watch it when for the first several months, and a friend of mine said you got to watch the show, and it's like it seems so. What I'm reading the TV guide, witchy poo. It's like what? And he says no, it's a really cool show. And when I saw it, I love this show, and I got the 40. Well, this will be another discussion,
Yeah.
but I always felt like year after year the Croft shows got chintzier and cheaper, and I didn't like them on tape as much, and and they seemed super cheesy. As an adult, they're still super cheesy, but on the one hand, they're gloriously cheesy because they were then. They weren't trying, they weren't making art there. They were making shows. And also having had many years experience in entertainment and in production and in budgeting and all that stuff, they had no time and no money. And HR Puffin stuff nearly destroyed them because they didn't know how to make a TV show, and they overspent, and film was expensive, and tape was cheaper. They had to do what they had to do. And now when I look at those shows, I'm astonished at how entertaining they are, and how they don't kind of go. They were just nutty. There's nothing really like them
Yeah.
to compare them to, and except maybe a like Laugh-In or one of the variety shows of the 70s, which they also did, because they weren't kind of on tape. They seemed more like variety show sketches
Yeah.
than shows, but they are shows. I love the era they were in because they're just so groovy, and the era of the Brady Bunch and all that, the Partridge Family. It's all falls under that ball, but I kind of love them as an adult. And at the time I was being very fussy because it's like, oh well, and oh, this is even dumber than that one. And I didn't dislike them. I still kind of watched them. And Far Out Space Nuts was so dumb that my brother and I liked it because it was so completely dumb.
Well,
You
yeah,
know,
I watched them, Lost Saucer and
yeah,
Dr. Shrinker and all that stuff. And I go, oh, it was almost like to see how I, I don't think I was consciously doing it, but I think you hit the nail on the head. It was like just to see how dumb these shows could get. And I'm a huge fan of Uncle Croc's block. And now that's not, I know that's Filmation and it's not, but I
but it could
mean,
be Croft.
but it's like all that stuff, and then you have Banana Splits. I was a huge fan of that, and that's Hanna-Barbera. Although Croft did have something to do with the design, didn't it? Didn't they?
Well,
Yeah,
the Hanna-Barbera, that gets confused a lot on the internet.
yeah,
I have the merchandise guide, and they have the characters at what they look like in costume and their drawings are, and those are unequivocally Hanna-Barbera designs by either like Jerry Eisenberg or Iwa Takamoto or one of those designers. They're cartoon designs, but what the Crofts did was they were at the time the premier costumers for a lot of theme parks, and tons of stage shows. So that, and because of the deal they made, and this is another, but because of Six Flags and the deal, and that's where they filmed the first season,
oh, yeah,
it all worked out really well. But the Crofts built the costumes. I don't think they did the sets either. I think that those were drawn and probably executed by an LA place. But as far as, and that was still, I'm sure that was all drawn out by the HB people because it has that look to it.
yeah,
But what happened with the Crofts was Banana Splits did so well, and the idea of having costume characters on a show appealed to NBC, so they approached the Crofts, who knew nothing. The same thing with the Brady Bunch Variety Hour. It's it's dreadful,
yeah,
and I think all 9 of them are on YouTube now. But then there's a book about how it was made.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable how much work went into that, how little time, what a whim it was between Silverman and Eisner just waving their hand and saying, just go make it. Oh, and don't tell Sherwood Schwartz. And
Well, I think about that now when I'm watching old variety shows. Like right now, I'm watching the Tim Conway Comedy Hour, which originally
yeah,
aired in 1970. And I asked my dad, "Did I ever watch this?" And he goes, "I don't know, probably." But it shows that it originally aired at 10 p.m., so I probably didn't, unless they reran them earlier, because I was pretty young in 1970. But it looks very familiar to me because unless it just Art Matrano just kept doing the same thing everywhere, and
that,
yeah, and I'm just confusing it, but it really looks familiar. So maybe they ran them in the early evening and summer repeats or something. I don't know, but
yeah,
anyway. But I'm looking at that show, and I watch other variety shows, and I just marvel at how they got these things done, which, like what you're saying, the expense was probably incredible, or maybe it wasn't so incredible back then, but it would be now if they were to, because you always wonder, why don't they do a variety show now? Well, and most people say, oh, it's because we don't have the same type of stars. Well, we do. It's just that they would ask $1 million to make an appearance. If, our special guest Brad Pitt, it's like,
the other reason is because I worked on the parades, again, another subject, the Disney TV parades, and they were constantly aware of energy level and viewership. And they don't want, it's one of the reasons the decibel level of some shows is so high. Like on Ellen, the audience is always screeching,
Oh yeah,
screaming, because I think they want people to keep that energy level up. They want you to keep people looking at the screen to see if there's something worth seeing. Um, they don't want the show to stop in any way, and so they can't do Ed Sullivan. They've tried, and even then it wasn't successful. And it's hard to do a variety show now where the audience has become so segmented, thanks to cable, thanks mostly to the way marketing deliberately segments and targets audiences. Everybody's watching a different channel now. Everybody's watching a different streaming service, a different thing on YouTube. The same audience won't watch the same things, and the network is terrified of someone switching. So they can't they couldn't have a singer come on and sing a 2.5 minute song
yeah,
because people just naturally do that. One of the reasons we getting way off subject here, but one of the reasons people believe Orson Welles' War of the Worlds hoax is because the Mercury Theater Campbell Playhouse wasn't very popular compared to the most popular show of the time, one of them, the Charlie McCarthy Edgar Bergen show.
hmm,
And they would, on those variety shows, there would be the singer would come on so they could regroup or whatever. It was just the tradition. There'd be like Dennis saying Dennis, or the Sportsman's Quartet. They had the singer come on, and that's when people changed to CBS to hear. And so they didn't hear the disclaimer, they didn't hear the setup, they just heard the chart Earth.
hmm,
So it's no different. People. My dad used to do that. Would drive me crazy. I want to watch something the beginning with the da 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 and the credits, and then
yeah,
watch it at the end where the union stuff comes up. I don't switch. My
yeah,
dad, my
yeah.
sister, put MTV on. Put MTV on. It's
You're,
like
you're you're probably like me. It's like you have to see it from the very beginning, no matter what it is, because
I
my dad's always like, it's like quiet, quiet, and it's like the Columbia logo or something, and it goes, you've seen the Columbia logo. It's who cares, and it's like. I want to see this film from the beginning. This is the beginning, It's like, and my dad's like logos, he doesn't care. But
well, on streaming services you can skip a theme song. Skip
yeah,
open.
oh, I
I
hate
don't
that.
want to do
Yeah,
that.
that's the part I want. If I want shows that they used to not have a theme song, I want them to reinsert a theme song
Yeah.
because remember shows on network to save more and more time. They, cut theme songs and say, now we're going way off topic, but anyway, um, in
Um,
connection to, oh, do you have a thought?
no, no, no. Go ahead.
Okay, I was going to say to make it a connection to Willy Wonka and I was going to say this earlier, and it keeps popping in and out of my mind. But were you this way? And I found the Willy Wonka movie better than the book, in the same way as I found the Wizard of Oz 39 movie better than the book, in that they made a purpose to the story. Because you were talking about Alice in Wonderland, we're going way off topic, talking about variety shows not having, like, any continuous link. And so this film and Wizard of Oz, it seemed like her purpose in the book wasn't necessarily to get back home, although she did, you know.
Mhm.
um it was more clear cut and set out. And the same thing with the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory book. There wasn't really a purpose of him doing that. I mean, where they kind of gave him a purpose more in the movie, like, if I win this chocolate factory, my life will be set, my future will be set. They didn't even really make that come across. It's almost like, yeah, let's go in this chocolate factory, see what happens. It wasn't. Yeah, yeah. That's
It-
how I kind of remember the book, and it's been a while since I've read the book. So,
the book doesn't focus on Charlie the same way. And it's funny that a movie would do it more, because you're right, it's rare for the movie to actually draw you in more to a character. Usually there's more detail, but it is a book that's aimed at like school age kids. And so the character of Charlie is much more intense. The way they find the tickets is different. They're it's still the last one being a hoax, but he finds the money, and it's the second. All the details of that are different. The other thing about the movie that's different, and I don't know if this was Dahl or I think it's David Seltzer who punched up the script. Um, all of those terrific asides, those gags, those sketches that were in, and here, including like the woman who's talking to the police out of nowhere. You want your case of Wonka bars? Didn't you hear me? It's
yeah.
your husband's life or your case of Wonka bars. It's those are not in the book, and I will give you an example of how some of us have just memorized these things where it's not really healthy. I was on the attraction at Star Wars Galaxy's Edge.
Yeah.
Not Rise of the Resistance, but the other one, the one that's sort of like Star Tours, only you get to shoot lasers.
Okay.
And I didn't really care. My son wanted to shoot. He's a video game guy, and he was destroying the universe or whatever you have to do. I was the least important person. I was the engineer, which basically you sit in the back and you push lighted buttons and pretend they do something. I love that, because how many films have you or TV shows have you seen where people pretend like I'm initiating? Ruth Buzzy was doing it on Lost Saucer, initiating Command Central.
Yeah.
If Ruth Buzzy could do it, I could do it. So one of the things I said as we were leaving is I said, "What's this from?" And I'm pushing the two buttons. I'm now telling the computer exactly what it can do with a lifetime supply of chocolate. That was one thing that they made so much fun, and it's not dated at all. In fact, it's worse now.
Yeah.
Media frenzy. What's the chicken or the egg? Who kicked up this frenzy? The news reporter, a brilliant line. We have to remind ourselves that there are way more important things than this. Frankly, I can't think of any of them, but
Right, exactly.
it was really, really great. And that's where you get the entire audience. It really, really was. So by the time you got to the Chocolate Factory, you'd already seen all of this. You were primed for this. You were sort of trained for this kind of movie. So it was going to come, wasn't so much of a surprise. And I thought the gags of the hands taking the cloaks, the room. Oh, and by the way, if you go on Rise of the Resistance, you tell me, soon as we walked into that little room, is he getting bigger or is the room getting smaller? There is a part of I don't know why I'm making this, but we did think of Willy Wonka when we got into that little room on Rise of the Resistance, because it's narrow and odd.
I'm sure Disney is like, is there a way we can get this film in our collection?
Well, creative people are inspired by anything,
That's true.
and being a huge Flying Nun fan and writing copy about Soren, you better believe I put the phrase "Who needs wings to fly" in my copy. Um, and I think that's the name of the theme song.
Right, right.
But it that part wasn't in the book either. They
No,
went in, signed the contract, and they started. So there was so much detail, and that's why you love to watch certain movies over again.
yeah,
You know, so much quotable lines. You're always being tackled. She's a girl who knows where she's going. I mean,
yeah.
we use those lines every day.
Well, the ones I use are, it's like strike that, reverse it. I say
Yeah,
that all the time because I do mix up things, and I I say it just like, or I'm a trifle deaf in this ear. So try to speak louder next time. And
yeah.
it just comes out, and people don't even. Not everyone knows where it's from, and it's like, it's like I know where
Oh,
it's.
but a quotable movie, and one thing I didn't understand until I read, I think it was Mel Stewart's book, was I think Pure Imagination,
Look it
when
up.
he and she, yes, that's the one, and she goes Rachmaninoff, like she's
Yeah,
a note, and I'm like, she's wrong, because you see Amadeus,
yeah,
and he said that was in the script deliberately to show that she didn't know what she was talking about.
yeah.
That was the game.
Now, I'll have to admit, when I first saw it, I didn't know the difference, but I started taking piano lessons and learning music theory and history and classical music pretty early on. So probably about age 7 or 8, I knew that there was Mozart, and I was like, "What?" So when I
Yeah,
saw the film again, I said, "Ah, it's just to show that she's not very bright." It's like, but
yeah,
yeah, it's like you have to kind of know this because I'm sure half the people out there say, it's Rachmaninoff." The movie said
yeah.
so. Yeah.
So it's details like that. The other thing that's cool about this movie is, I keep drawing a Disney parallel, but the art director was one of the most legendary Disney Imagineers and artists of all time, Harper Goth.
Yeah.
I mean, he was one of the architects of Disneyland.
Yeah.
And that boat design is very similar to the Jungle Cruise, and even more similar if you've been to Epcot and gone to the Land Pavilion. It's called Living with the Land. It was originally called Listen to the Land. You get a tour of the hydroponic gardens and all of the futuristic ways. Thank you so much. There he
Wonderful,
is.
Harper.
Yeah, I mean, that's the design. The boats are almost identical on Living with the Land, and the way you float past these, yeah, the chocolate room looks like the the um, the big greenhouse in
Hmm.
Living. You really do
And I
feel
noticed that when I went to it. There's a good shot of the chocolate.
it's gorgeous. It's just gorgeous. And what's cool about it is that the movie was not an expensive movie, and they had to use a lot of found things. And so, but it works because it's this, and yet it makes a comment at the same time. You've got this sort of magical, fantastic chocolate room with all these things, yet it's in a building in a very sort of factory. It's a factory. It's industrial looking in the background.
Yeah.
It's like in a way, it's like a movie set, um, because it's showing you that it is a factory. My theory about the movie more than even the book is because Gene Wilder says he's always telling lies
Yeah.
all through. Always did. My theory about the way it was done is that everything that they experienced was designed, created, and built for them to experience, because he had researched all these kids. He kind of knew it was going to
Yeah.
be Charlie, but he wasn't sure.
Oh
And
yeah, the that what do you want to call it? The fizzy lifting drink. Not that one. Excuse me. The car at the end that just
Yeah,
There's only enough seats for the existing kids and their parents and whatever. It's like, how did they figure that one out? Didn't they think Augustus would make it to this far?
exactly.
You know,
He puts the he tempts them with exactly what their weakness is.
yeah. Oh,
You
the
know,
same with the boat. The boat has enough seats just for everybody. So
yeah, yeah. And the chocolate room is something, it's the factory, but these people are coming, and somebody like him, it's like would have that. It's like a big press event,
yeah,
where they hang a lot of things and they theme a convention center to something.
mhm,
And there are like, if it's going to be the tropics, or it's not that much different than what a big enterprise would do if they had if they had a big convention in a major city. So that's the way it feels. And you're right, I forgot about that. The whole, how come there's so many seats, is
yeah.
it's yeah. and
I
and
mean, you
then
could be all, well, it's a movie and it's economical. They don't need to have extra seats. But yeah, I know. But
yeah,
it's more fun to say there was a purpose to it.
but the book had that. I think the
Yeah,
movie did.
yeah,
And Charlie doesn't get tempted in the book. There are no fizzy lifting drinks.
that's right.
Charlie's
That's right.
flawless, perfect, and he doesn't really have any. In fact, when I first saw it, I was shocked, because I'm listening to the album and it's like, what's going on with the burping and the bubbles and all this stuff? And and it's like, come on, let's have some, Charlie. Wait a minute, they're breaking a rule, and Charlie's perfect.
Did you say you listened to the album first before you even saw the film?
Yeah,
Wow. Now I've
yeah,
done that before. I could tell you one that I did is Monty Python's Meaning of Life, and I didn't know what was going on in some scenes. And sometimes I was like, I don't want to know, and then I eventually saw it. But it's like, for some reason, when that film came out, I just didn't rush to the theater. I was a huge Python fan, and so it took me a few years to see that one. So I just had the album, and I'd play it, and I try to figure out what are they doing in this scene, because like on
yeah.
the Willy Wonka album, they didn't have a narrator. Well, now they're going into this room, and now they're doing this. You
No,
just had to guess.
the second half is almost all sound effects.
Yeah,
Second album, and the boat ride, the wondrous boat ride, it's called. It's far from wondrous. And then when you see it, the things that are in it are just. But again, you know, it's a rear screen projection, or it's actually, in that case, it's a matte process.
yeah,
But what would have stopped, if it was real, what would have stopped Willy Wonka from? A theme park can do that. They have big screens,
yeah,
and they can project horrifying things. And I mean, that all could happen. And then he puts the gum in front of the girl who chews gum. Gee, all
yeah.
of the all of those things seem to fit. The wanting everything. Um, so, and then that whole scene at the end, which, gosh, probably the most quoted thing. It's, "You get nothing."
Right.
John Stewart, "Good day, sir."
Yeah,
You know, John Stewart said it all the time. It's
yeah,
probably still.
yeah.
Um, that scene isn't in the book,
Right.
and you that unexplainable. Everything's cut in half in his office.
Yeah.
We used to say my grandmother designed that office, because she would never give you a whole candy bar or a chewing
Half a
gum.
gum. Yeah,
She'd break it in half and give my brother like a juicy fruit. And it's like, juicy fruit doesn't have flavor along anyway. It's like,
yeah,
what good is a juicy fruit? You know, but that scene is intense, and it's the climax, because the movie doesn't have what most movies had, and no movie is missing today, which is a slam bang finale ending with a lot of action and explosions and chases and thrills. It ends after the TV room, go to his office, big argument. The biggest action is the elevator,
right.
but
And and the
it
credits roll out during that.
well, it follows its own rules. I mean,
Yeah,
it follows its own rules, and that's the same thing with Alice in Wonderland. That Disney's does build to a climax, but it's like, oh, she woke up.
yeah,
You know, did she tell anyone? You don't know. But that's what's so cool about it, is everything is so literal now, that this is what I love about Hanna-Barbera cartoons. You have 60 seconds to know the premise of this show, and then you are on your own. We're not going to tell you how or why or what the Pussycats were doing at NASA.
There's a non sequitur for you.
Yeah,
Wow. Uh,
yeah.
um, so I'm gonna just shift gears like you just did. Okay, so you grew up in Florida. Did you have Burger Chef restaurants down there?
We did not.
Oh,
And I was very grateful to Burger Chef because on Sundays they would have that theater show where they would show like Jack and the Beanstalk with Gene Kelly and stuff.
okay.
And Burger Chef and Jeff, it's incredible.
Yeah.
Paul Winchell's voice. We did not have that. We had Royal Castle, which is like White Castle, and we had Burger Castle.
Okay. Well, there's a reason I was saying this. Now, I got this book recently, but it's over on the shelf, and I don't want to run over there and get it. But you know those Arcadia Press books? They're kind of
I love those.
brownish. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I got a few because, here in Oregon, you can only get the Oregon ones. And it's like I was looking on their site and I was looking on Amazon, and it's like, oh crap, they have one about Hershey Park, and one about Freedom Land and one about, this, that, the other, Knott's Berry Farm and stuff like that. So I ordered a bunch of them directly through the publisher, and Burger Chef was one of them. Now, Burger Chef did not originate in California, but they managed to make their way out there at some point before they started contracting, and I think they're completely gone now. Yeah.
Yeah.
But in the early 70s, there was connections on Willy Wonka that you could go there, you could get a golden ticket, which I still have. You could get passes to see the movie. I don't know if they're free or discount. I don't remember that, and I can't. My dad won't remember. My mom is no longer living, so I can't ask anybody. No, but my sister probably wouldn't remember either. But I would probably remember something like that if I knew. But I assume we paid admission, but anyway, uh, there was a big connection with Burger Chef, so that's what I was asking if.
Hmm.
And I know they did make it down to Florida, but maybe not Miami, Florida. They didn't maybe go that far south. So,
No, I would have been gone to one at least once just out of gratitude for the stuff they showed on the Sundays. And that
yeah,
was late 70s, early 80s, just like the SFM Holiday Network. They would show
oh yeah,
kind of cool things. That was the same kind of thing. And no, but I never had the pleasure of going to
okay,
Burger. There was also Borden Burger for a while, and then it changed to Borden BBF, and it was very good. They were really good burgers, but they didn't last very long.
but none of the ones you're mentioning, they didn't have any Willy Wonka tie-in or anything
No,
like that.
no,
Okay,
it seemed well. That was the thing is it kind of came and went, so there wasn't much chance to see it until it was in
okay,
matinees. Same thing with the Puff and Stuff movie. I couldn't see that. Now there was an album I listened to, and I love that album um, constantly, and that didn't see the movie until many years later when it was on local TV because they didn't show that in matinees, and they didn't it only played a couple of weeks, and it played at a theater that was far, didn't play at a neighborhood theater, so I couldn't go. So sometimes that would happen too. I don't know exactly why, but A Boy Named Charlie Brown, when that was released, I had to go to Coral Gables, which was quite a distance from South Miami, to see it. But that was the Peanuts movie, and I was very much into Peanuts. So
right.
that was a special thing that my dad drove me to that because I had to see that.
You
Um,
mentioned something earlier, and that's a movie that we saw. Is like my parents, they didn't necessarily go by Disney 100%. So if it was G rated, that's usually what they went by
yeah,
when I was a kid. So we did see. That's why we saw Willy Wonka. That's why we saw Boy Named Charlie Brown, Snoopy Come Home. I'm trying to think of other non-Disney stuff. Charlotte's Web.
I saw Charlotte's Web when it was new
Yeah.
because
Well, all
that was
these I saw when they were new. The first movie I ever saw in the theater, but this was a Disney movie, it's The Love Boat. So any any kids movie after that, I pretty much saw. But it's kind of funny as the 70s wore on, my parents were very picky, and I didn't object because I was still seeing a movie. But I never saw Robin Hood when it first came out
mm,
because I think they reissued, I don't know if they reissued Snow White that year or something like that. And it's like, you know, my dad is definitely going to say Snow White's better than Robin Hood. Maybe most fans would too, but so
mm,
um, in fact, they rotoscope scenes from one to the other. Anyway, that's a whole
that's right.
yeah, that's a whole another story. But anyway, So I didn't see Rescuers or any of those new Disney animated features in the 70s when they were brand new, except for the Aristocats I saw, and I saw Bedknobs and Broomsticks. But I think as time wore on, my parents realized that 70s animation wasn't as good as 40s and 40s animations. So, or
We used to
50s
call
animation.
we used to call it the scritchy lines. We
Yeah.
didn't know what the Xerox process
Oh, the
was. So
Xerox. Yeah, yeah.
does that have the scritchy lines, or does it have the regular, straight lines? And all the stuff in the 70s and the everything in the 60s and 70s had the scritchy lines,
Right.
and they found ways to smooth it out, or they would hand ink some stuff. But the scritchy lines were now it's kind of the nostalgic look to me
Yeah.
to see them. And I think that they kind of DNR that down a little bit
Yeah,
now,
they
because
do.
it doesn't look like, and there are a lot of people upset about, I remember a guy sent me, because I'd reviewed the Sword and the Stone Blu-ray, and he sent me an HD that he had, and I don't know how he got it, but he said, look at this, and then look at, or maybe it was just stills, and now look at the redone. Well, you know, those films also had dust on the cells, and they can paint that out if they want to spend the money to do it. They take all that out because a film that's got a family audience has to stand on the Target and Walmart shelves next to the SpongeBob's and all of those things that are brand new, and so they can't look that much different because the young families, they might return it or something. They might say there's something wrong with my VCR or my Blu-ray. I'm seeing all these strange white specks all over the picture. Uh, there, there's no telling, but they, more than anything, everything has to seem that's released to the mainstream audience has to seem like it was made this year. That's why they're very
Well, also they smoothed it out. Like one thing I noticed, Little Mermaid and back, because Little Mermaid was the last hand painted one, was, well, you can't obviously manually paint something so smooth that you can't tell that it's painted. And so you
yeah,
kind of see this little swirling effect if a character is standing still and they have like a solid gray or solid single color form, you'll see like the subtly shift. I noticed that on earlier VHS and the very first DVDs. But then with computer animation, they fixed all that up, and now nothing moves on anything, and it's like it's very sharp and pristine. But I guess
yeah,
that's the reason why what you're
that
saying,
is the
you keep
reason.
it for today's audience. I wasn't even thinking about that. I thought they just said we need to make this look sharp, which
No, I think that's the reason. I remember being. I think one of the things that makes, we were talking about going back to things you loved as a kid or didn't or whatever.
yeah,
Going back to the Hanna-Barbera stuff, even the stuff that wasn't as highly touted, the stuff that isn't the Flintstones, Jetsons, Yogi Bear.
yeah,
Uh, it's almost like folk art now. It's so made by hand. It's so human
yeah.
to watch like and see. I watched Charlotte's Web. I think that the DVD. I wish they'd do a Blu-ray. The DVD quality is not great,
Mm.
but I think it's on either Amazon or Hulu. And I watched it because obviously there's been some work on it. So I wish they'd reissue this print. Um, but they didn't spend the money, which Disney didn't always either. It depends on whether it's a Snow White or it's a Robin Hood. They're going to put so much into, and DNR is like push the button and da 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 da, and going through and hand painting is what you do for Pinocchio. But Charlotte's Web has the dust, but it also has. If you look at Wilbur, the color ranges change, in relation, because they had the heads on a different cell and all, and you can see the ink swirling around, and it's kind of beautiful. You know, it's the craft of the ink and paint artist. It's the craft of, you are looking at a actual piece of art in motion. So we see stuff now that is so flawless that it's like, then it's like the difference between homemade brownies from scratch or homemade bread, and bread that you get, that came off a truck that's been sitting and all that, that's made by the billions, or cookies. That's the way it feels now. I love those cartoons then. I even love the lesser stuff that people go, ugh, online. Roman holidays, please. I love that. Hamill and Ferdin and Dave Willick and yeah,
Well,
I'm there.
I have all that stuff, and because I had, I loved Hanna-Barbera when I was a kid, but I didn't understand why it didn't look as good as the '60s stuff.
Yeah,
And
no,
I didn't, now I do, but and it bugged me even when they did newer Flintstones. I said, why doesn't this look like the '60s Flintstones? And I didn't know all the details then. I know now, and it's like, but I still have my own nostalgia for them, and in a certain way, the animation may not be pristine. The inking and painting may not even be pristine, the character models, but the writing a lot of times was still pretty sharp on a lot of those shows. And people just dismiss and they go, it's that crap from the early '70s. One thing that I had total revisionist, it was just like me with Sid and Marty Krofft. I didn't like Filmation stuff very much. I'd be like, another Filmation show. And now I totally admire it, and it's probably what you said, hand done, hand painted, made in the USA, all done, by real live people, not machines, it's like, you know,
and it was Filmation too. That's again, where it's another subject, but
yeah,
Filmation, I did like a lot of Filmation in its day, and I admire Filmation because they created this ingenious process for
yeah,
basically beating the bids that Hanna-Barbera put in,
yeah,
so they could get the work, and they employed a lot of people too. So they were able to like beat the cost by like $10,000 or something. When you know that stuff, it only makes it seem better to me that
yeah,
they were getting the kind of entertainment value with such minimal movement, or flipping the cells, or reuse, because those were written to the pictures. The writers had to go through the stock. It was a stock animation process, and write around the stock. You
mhm,
know, and it's really it's almost a different kind of animation and into itself. And when you look at it from that standpoint, 120 He-Man episodes, and they didn't have and those were the first of their kind. When you look at that, it totally changes your outlook on it. I'm a huge Hanna-Barbera fan. I've got a book coming out in a few months about them, and I've studied more about them than I ever have in my life. And there's no denying the weaknesses. That's easy. That's shooting fish in a barrel. But there's also no studio that didn't have to cut corners as well, including Disney in the '60s and '70s. We're talking about scritchy lines, reusing animation. It was a reality, and every single boutique studio that started out with better cartoons and breaking the mold and artistic brilliance, soon as they had no time and no money, most of their stuff wasn't as entertaining as Hanna-Barbera's was, or Filmation's.
yeah,
If you look at like the Patty Frilling, and I love the Oddball Couple,
yeah,
but they couldn't really compete as much when they had to suddenly make a bunch of shows fast, and suddenly, and this better because I learned this from you on the commentaries and from your book. It was harder for them to compete against a place like Hanna-Barbera, who had been doing it for a long time without having the luxury of one Pink Panther a month.
right,
There's a big difference between making one a month, or one wonderful Ant in the Aardvark, or one really funny Inspector, and then having to make the Crazy Legs Cranes. You know, you have to at least be forgiving
mhm,
of those limitations, and see what you can enjoy about them. And if you don't, that's okay too. But I just don't like the dismissiveness, and the one sentence throwaway of, oh, they did this, or oh, they never did it. It's like, you know they're it's not really fair, to because they were so incredibly successful, and a lot of people still love what these people did, and there was people doing it, and I think a lot of young audiences would too, um, because they're not like a lot of stuff that's out there now. They're,
Right.
and most of what Hanna-Barbera and Filmation did, um, was not problematic. Some of it was in today's world. So you make a decision about how you want to present that. But it's astonishing how little of it was,
Yeah.
you know. And then when it was, it's like, okay, what was on what other kind of humor appeared on primetime television or Saturday morning TV at the very same time, you know. So it's not an excuse, but it's a reality, you know. But Willy Wonka, let's tie Hanna-Barbera, and
All
I'll
right.
ask you if you've seen Tom and Jerry in
Oh
Willy
yeah,
Wonka.
I was gonna say that's a way to tie it in. I was going to say Tom and Jerry and Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Very polarizing film for a lot of people.
Yeah,
But I actually liked it. It wasn't my favorite. My favorite Tom of the more recent Tom. First of all, let me say this: I'm not a huge Tom and Jerry fan. It's kind of like one note for me. More than even 70s Hanna-Barbera, believe it or not. You know, um, in fact, I like the 70s Tom and Jerry better in some respects. The TV one where they have bow ties and stuff, which
oh yeah, yeah.
some people go, so that's sacrilege. Anyway, what my, my point was, I was going to say, so the only more recent Tom and Jerry movie that I've seen that I liked was Tom and Jerry Johnny Quest, that crossover. I thought that was brilliant.
Right.
So,
Their animation was comparable
yeah,
to at least 50s theatrical stuff.
yeah,
They really try to, they're dealing with a different form. It's a like 75-minute feature, and so they have to make it a little episodic so they can put in gags and all, but they have to sustain a story.
right.
It's hard to take a 6-7 minute cartoon characters and make them work for
Yeah,
that long. So all the direct to videos have, and I'm sorry, but a lot of major features do. They all have occasional story issues where, what are you going to do with all this time? You know, and so that's the big challenge. But some of those Tom and Jerry direct to videos, some of the Scooby Doo's are very good.
yeah.
Some of them are not, okay.
So,
Um,
so on
but
the
they're
Tom and Jerry Willy Wonka, I'll say that my 2 cents, and then you can say yours. I like it that it was pretty faithful to the movie. It wasn't necessarily faithful to the book anymore. So it had some of the same songs, had same dialogue, just it was suddenly animated. So in a certain respect, I enjoyed it on that level. It was not unenjoyable. It was kind of like you take the little Willy Wonka figure you saw on the Quaker box or on the candy golden ticket or whatever, and suddenly he's moving. Now they didn't use that exact Jay Wardish character design, but it's like
it was
I,
it
I
was the
got what they were doing, and so I appreciated it on that level, even though most people go, "Hold your nose,"
I wonder if how many of those just from the title did that, because
Yeah,
it seems like wow, but I thought their Oz ones were very good, especially
yeah,
Back to Oz was actually outstanding because I've read the Oz books, and it actually, whoever, I can't remember the writers, but it had lots of references and loyalty to what was going on in the Oz books, because the Oz books were funny as
yeah,
well, exciting and adventurous. And that's one of the things that was missing from some of the adaptations of late. So this had that, and not only that, but Back to Oz had songs by the songwriters of La La Land and
yeah.
um, what's the story? What's the musical about the boy in school and he writes a letter? Oh, I can't being Ethan Allen or Evan Hansen. Sorry,
Oh, I don't even
Ethan
know
Allen to it. Dear Evan Hansen. They wrote that, and they recently did some Disney stuff.
that.
So there's no, they were outstanding, and nobody mentions Tom and Jerry Back to Oz in the same breath, but it's the same songwriters. So
Yeah,
it's not
yeah,
they get, and here's the other thing that people need to know before we go back to the Wonka thing about those direct to videos. They don't have nearly the budget of a feature, and they do have to export some of the work. The features do it too. Look at the credits, and they don't outsource all the animation. I know this because I talked to Spike Brandt about it, and he said the key stuff, the really important animation that we want to get so that we can oversee it and supervise it. They have people like Dale Bear working on it. Read those credits. Dale Bear animated the Slugworth sequence. There was an original song with Slugworth. The animation in that is astonishing. You know, that's because it was done by a master animator. It isn't all it's more of the perfunctory stuff that needs to be sent. So that's why you have this feeling of uneven. It's sort of like the Hanna-Barbera features. There is some incredibly animated stuff, and then there's some not quite so much because they don't have the money or the time, but they want to get the best scenes the best they can get them. And that's one of the things that isn't realized, that they're not completely not hiring people. They're hiring wherever they can. So the Willy Wonka one, first of all, my son watched it with me, and he couldn't believe that the boat ride was scarier because Tuffy went like this insane. He did the same rhyme, but it was frightening because of Tuffy. He said, I can't imagine that they could, because it didn't have all the scenes, with the chicken and
Right.
but it was equally creepy because of the voice performance. So you also have that, you've got
that again. Yeah.
He said, I can't believe that Tuffy made that scarier to me. And Tom and Jerry are like like Abbott and Costello. They take a Frankenstein or a mummy or the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and they find a way to insert them in for comedy relief, to sort of watch the serious story or the semi-serious story going on and somehow be involved with it. And yet there's two different elements going on. Or a 30s musical where you have the romance and you have the big show, and then you have the character actors doing funny stuff, Hugh Herbert or something. It's like that. They're given an assignment. Okay, we're Warner Brothers. We own these things. Put them together, go. And they make it work because they're pretty talented at it. I mean, I would never have thought they could. And I'm not going to say, oh, wow, but I'm going to say they did do it, and it's again, it's entertaining. It's similar, but it's different enough. But it's basically synergy. It's taking two major, and isn't it something? If anything, you could say, look at how huge Willy Wonka is as a brand for Warner. How lucky they are to have Warner. So I mean, to have Willy Wonka by default.
Yeah.
Because if this were 1972, I wouldn't have thought that there'd be a big box set with the Blu-ray in it,
Right.
which I have.
How come Paramount can't hold on to their assets?
Well,
I know the story on this one. Yeah.
Well, didn't you read? There was something I read somewhere that it said a studio sours on a project, and they said Paramount and Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. So I think maybe even during the making of it or shortly after. You know how sometimes you say, why didn't they promote this terrific movie enough? It's like whomever is in charge isn't a chance.
I'm kind of making a jab at Paramount in general, because early Paramount films are now distributed by Universal. Many Paramount cartoons are owned by Harvey, or I guess that's now NBC Universal again. It's like, Paramount doesn't have anything. I mean, they do, but it's just funny how things have
It's true.
switched around, and they seem to have lost a lot of the stuff that was kind of, in a certain way, kind of uniquely theirs, and then they don't own it now. So,
Yeah. They were sort of doing what's going on now with acquisitions before it became, sort of the normal process for various companies to suddenly acquire stuff, and suddenly this is no, this is this product. And you know, it happened to Hanna-Barbera a couple of times because not now they're sort of Warner owned, but they are a brand, which I'm happy to see that the logo's back, the
Yeah.
LHB, at least in England. But there was a time when Cartoon Network came along where their name was removed because it was you'd see a coloring book or something, and it would be, you know, Yogi Bear Cartoon Network. And I was glad they were still on, but I wasn't too thrilled about, you know, you're not just talking about Bill and Joe, you're representing thousands of people
Yeah.
who work. But, you know, maybe that's me, I don't know. But where else did we want to go with Wonka? Did you ever get to go to an event where the kids were,
What do you
you
mean?
know, the grown-up actors, the Denise Nickerson and Pat?
The only one I've ever met was at one show I saw Paris Themin,
Yeah,
and so I got his autograph. But I've never seen a grouping of all of them together, other than the extra features that are on the DVDs. And I met Gene Wilder, which is a funny story.
oh, what's that?
Um, it was around the time his autobiography came out, and he was in San Francisco at the Balboa Theater, which is this kind of, it's not seedy, I guess. It's just older, you know, and they play, you know, older films. They don't tend to play the first run stuff. And so they're having him there to sign his autobiography, and then they're going to show Young Frankenstein, which I believe my friend and I went to see. But, you know, it's like beforehand, I had his book with me, or maybe I can't remember. Right. I think I had it with me. So, and I had him sign it, and it's like nobody else was paying attention to him. It was kind of sad, but it's like
Really?
the good part about it is I get to talk to him for about 20 minutes or so before the film started, and you know, I asked him about Blazing Saddles and Willy Wonka and just different films that he did. Very soft spoken. I mean, I think over the years he mellowed significant, whether it was by medication or just getting older. You know, I don't know, but you know, he certainly wasn't the manic guy that was like in the producers, ah! You know, the way, you know, and even in, you know, certain scenes in Willy Wonka, it always seems like early Gene Wilder films always had to have that one scene where he just flips out, you know, and he wasn't doing that, and you know, he was just very calm. He signed his book, signed the book, and then I went in, and it was just kind of odd that he was in this kind of weird spot, a movie theater, with nobody really talking to him or being interested in him. It's like,
No,
okay,
that's hard. I'm stunned. That's
yeah,
really hmm. Oh, but I've heard well, I've seen instance of that he was extremely shy. And you know, I mentioned him being on Merv Griffin show, but when Merv interviewed him, it had to be just him alone. I think it was in on his estate. uh you know, it wasn't with an audience. So I think, like a lot of these folks that are go crazy on, and when they're performing, they're extremely quiet and introverted
yeah.
when you meet
Now,
them.
you probably researched this more than me. I haven't seen too many interviews from the time for Willy Wonka that Gene Wilder did. Did he not discuss it at all? Um,
I I don't know if it was by design or what. He may have just been one of those actors, because there are some actors who simply didn't like to do talk shows because he didn't. There are actors now. There's some that just, I don't know what I would say, and I don't really like to do that. Now this, it's funny because they, in this era of everything being so real and so sincere, talk shows are just as scripted as the Lux Radio Theater interview at the end. It might have been easier for him now because
yeah,
the interviews are so short and they're so controlled. But I don't remember seeing him interviewed much at all, period.
yeah,
And Willy Wonka was such in a lot of ways, a small movie that in an era where suddenly those movies weren't big news anymore. Bedknobs and Broomsticks was not big news either.
yeah.
Um, and we knew it was coming out. There were commercials. More than anything else, there was stuff in the stores. It was the album. There was the books.
I
You
did
know,
this.
you know, and oh, and I love those Whitman books. You
Yeah,
know, those are great. So you kind of knew, but Angela Lansbury, I don't think talked about it at the time. I don't remember her. I
Yeah,
remember her mentioning it in passing, but it wasn't a particularly happy time for
no,
her. Not because of the movie so much, though I
yeah,
don't think she's a big fan of Robert Stevenson,
yeah,
um, because she was an actor's actor and he was not an actor's director,
mm,
according to her. But I mean, you know, she had a certain way about acting that I don't think she was getting from her. He was more interested in the mechanics and the authenticity and all those things, and she just didn't feel like. But it wasn't that didn't sour her on the movie. It's that she had personal issues with her daughter, and they had moved to Ireland, and their house had burned down, and so I think that's one of the reasons she didn't do much. She said a whole lot more about it years later
yeah,
than she did at the time. But it
yeah.
opened fairly quietly compared to the Disney movies in the 60s. And Willy Wonka, I just don't think they were putting marketing dollars behind
Yeah.
these anymore. You
Like
know,
I don't. The only thing I remember is uh Gene Wilder being interviewed was more like around 1974 when he did The Little Prince.
yeah,
Um,
there were for
you know,
that.
there's interviews then, and he probably in passing talked about Blazing Saddles and stuff like that, and Silver Streak and whatever he was doing in the mid '70s. You know, but uh, you know, I think that was kind of like when he started opening up to doing more interviews, and certainly by the '80s when Entertainment Tonight comes, oh yeah, I'm doing the Woman in Red and blah blah blah. You know, it's like, and he still wasn't very talkative, but you know, they'd grab him because he was doing a new movie and they needed material, you know, for these shows. So you know, but
The Little Prince probably was viewed as a more prestigious project than Willy Wonka was. Roald Dahl was not didn't have the fame he gained later.
yeah,
Um, and and really, this was except for Musher with Love, I guess, or You Only Live Twice. He'd worked on that screenplay and on Chitty, but he wasn't a household name that he
right,
became.
yeah.
And you know, in fact, when on those Maxim commercials, she kept saying my husband," and it was like, "Oh, who your husband is? Why won't you say?" But
Well, I'm wondering if this, correct me if I'm wrong, I think what kind of, I mean, you and I knew Roald Dahl from the books and everything, but I think what kind of made him more a household name is that TV movie where about her
yeah,
stroke and how he took care of her and everything during all those years. You know, I think
yeah,
that kind of put him more into prominence through her, you know,
right.
and Glenda Jackson's performance. I forgot who played Roald Dahl in that one, but
Was it Dirk Bogarde or Anthony Hopkins? One of
I don't remember. I have to look it up. It's not important, but
yeah,
anyway.
no, but it yeah, that's true. He was not terribly well known, and she was very well known, and so that was part of it. But The Little Prince was directed by Stanley Donen, and Lerner and Lowe wrote the score. I mean, not that Leslie Bricusse and Anthony Newley were any slouches, but um, it was, and Bob Fosse was in it, and you know, it just seemed like you knew more about that, even though that movie was probably a much bigger. I mean, it sort of devastated Lerner and Lowe because they thought, and that was an odd, strange movie.
Yeah,
You know,
I
too.
didn't
That
like it
was
very much. You know, I
well,
remember seeing it because I liked Gene Wilder by that point, and I just was kind of, you know,
well, it's heavy symbolism, and it's all symbolism. It's really a stage play, and
yeah,
I saw it done as a stage play, not with the songs, but and it works better on stage. Um, but the score is lovely, but I can't watch it anymore because even though I understand why he has to die to go to his planet, I'm sorry if I'm spoiling it, folks. Ever since I had a child, it's like I can't look at that scene anymore and hear that song and
right,
the things that you know. And Richard Kiley is one of the most underrated talents because he could do everything. Um, but he was very accessible. He was on TV shows and stuff. So I think he was kind of taken for granted. He was one of those Broadway giants who played supporting roles on FBI, you know. Um, and it's like that today with some of the big Broadway people. They're not in Hollywood, they're guest stars, but
yeah,
in Broadway, they're big, they're huge.
yeah,
Um, but I think that was part of it. it just sort of came and went. It grew in stature, and it really was the public that embraced it.
Yeah.
It wasn't through any promotion or anything.
Ironically, I think the person who did the most promotion for it wasn't even in the film. It was Sammy Davis Jr. by having a hit with Candyman. So, you know,
And I wonder how many people, when they first see that sequence and think two things: gee whiz, this gentleman doesn't sing it the way Sammy Davis did, but really the way it was, though Sammy Davis, I think, wanted to be in it.
oh yeah,
But I that's the first kind of jolt. But the second thing, and Aubrey Woods is a terrific character actor.
yeah, yeah,
The other thing that kind of throws people is this from this? Because people are so used to, the Candyman was a huge hit.
yeah,
And so it's not associated directly. There's a lot of songs like that aren't associated directly with the
right,
film,
yeah.
but they can.
Yeah.
And,
Good
and that,
example I can think of is "You'll Never Walk Alone." You know, nobody thinks of
yeah.
Carousel. You know, you think of Jerry Lewis Telethon, if anything.
Well, even Edelweiss, to
Yeah,
me, when I heard Edelweiss, I thought, isn't this some old folk song? Because it's on the
yeah,
Fisher Price,
yeah,
toy record player, and Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy. You
yeah,
think, oh, must have just sang it because it was a hit. No, it was introduced in Buck Privates.
yeah.
So, and
Or
Silver Bell, Drop Kid.
yeah, Silver Bells is on it, and then well, the other one that's in Sound of Music that they use for commercials now for Claritin. A few of my favorite things, you know. It's
Yeah,
like, you know,
which is for some people a Christmas song.
yeah, or a
Uh,
Christmas song. It's like I don't associate it with either. It's Sound of Music, but then yeah, you know,
yeah, sometimes that happens. So it's interesting how time changes the perception of things, and it's always fun to speculate on how what we see presently will be perceived. I watched the oh boy, are we going off subject? I watched the Lost in Space movie finally not too long ago. And it wasn't terrible, it wasn't great. It wasn't as terrible as I thought it would be. Um, I was disappointed that they didn't let Bill Mumy play the role of the guy who looked just like him
yeah,
in the movie. But I did think that the special effects were super dated.
mhm.
They were really 90s. A minute you go, oh, 90s or 80s. And so I wonder if the effects, and I think we discussed this another time, you have to wonder if it isn't so much how good the effects are at the time, it's how good they're used.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, I mean, well, that'll be a good segue for Willy Wonka as far as we haven't really talked about the Johnny Depp one, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I
yes.
mean, so just going by effects, not the story or anything else, do you think that Charlie improved in any way over Willy Wonka?
Um, I was reluctant to see it for a couple of reasons. One is that I was attached to the original, and two is I thought it was going to creep me out a lot because I thought, okay, the book originally did creep me out, especially the Violet Beauregard thing. I
Yeah,
mean, the fact that it just turns into a big rolled ball, big ball, rolled doll, and is filled with juice. I mean, from chewing gum. That's what, to me, the most disturbing thing in the book. That's like the finger and the woman turns into a cat. That's just too weird,
mhm,
you know. And so I thought, if they're probably going to do some kind of CG thing with distortion, and it's just going to be so, and I don't want that in my head. As it turned, um, there were things about it that I thought, what bugged me was they marketed it as this is much closer to the original book.
yeah,
No, actually, it was not. There were differences and there were similarities. They did include the story about the prince with the chocolate castle, and they had to explain, because movies have to explain now, where the Oompa Loompas came from, and he did explain it in the movie, um, but not in as much detail.
yeah,
The whole dentist thing was not in the book.
no,
Uh, what was added was the ending, and this was a good use of CG because we wanted to see what happened to these kids after, when they went into the world. And in the Gene Wilder version, oh, they're fine. They're
yeah,
back to their themselves because they didn't learn anything. In a way, that's more like real life because do people learn or do they not? That's a good question. It was sort of open ended. In this version, we saw that they were forever distorted, and it also kind of messed up. Their parents were as messed up as them as they were in the original because it was as much of a satire of bad parenting than it was of anything else. And so you had the super mom who was pushing Violet, and suddenly, or was it her? I think, or whatever. She was embarrassed by her, which was heartbreaking.
Yeah.
That her mother rejected her, that she wasn't perfect anymore. I think that was Violet. It may have been. I'm pretty sure. So that part I thought we added an interesting dimension. There was a spoof of "It's a Small World" in it, which was amusing. And I liked when he said, "Good morning, starshine. The earth says hello." My son thought the line about cannibalism is frowned upon in certain culture. There was a lot of funny lines. I can't figure out why Johnny Depp was wearing Kay Ballard's mother's-in-law hairstyle.
You're the first person who made that comparison. I like that.
First I thought was it looked real nice on Kay. I mean, it's okay for him. It's a nice look.
They should put that theme music when he walks in. Da, 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 da,
Song. But it was surprisingly not weird enough. I was
yeah.
expecting it to go. It's Tim Burton. Let's go nuts. It's Roald Dahl and Tim Burton. So and I thought it was it wasn't. I didn't dislike it. I just don't think it was as memorable. Large and you cannot, even though the original was deliberately not filmed like a traditional musical, because they didn't have the money and they also didn't want the big scene singing in the street.
Right.
Golden that's why Anthony Newley, he wanted that, but he deliberately made the songs contained. And in a way that also helped the original film because there's a lot of people who don't like or don't understand the way musicals are, especially a couple of generations that didn't grow up with them and think it's weird when people break songs. So even though this has the songs in it, it works. And I don't particularly like it when people say, "Oh, I always skip Cheer Up Charlie." It's an important song, and it's there for a reason, and that's what that's probably the most musical thing, because see, there's my thing again. Switch the channel, fast forward. It's there for a reason.
It's just like Over the Rainbow in Wizard of Oz. You could say that's a slow, draggy song. It just happens to tell the whole plot of the movie or the whole premise of it or whatever. She's having aspirations and dreams of something better than living on some farm in Kansas. So in black and white.
There was a contingent that wanted to take part of your world out of Little Mermaid because in the tests the kids were jiggling and wiggling a little bit because it was a song, and that was beautifully staged because things were going on during her singing, with Sebastian reacting and stuff. It was really important, but they were thinking of cutting it, and that's Ariel's signature song. So that kind of thing happens. But I think missing the songs was a part of it. What my favorite scene in the whole movie was one gag where it's the flashback to the young Willy Wonka. It was Freddie Highmore, I think. No, it was Charlie. Maybe it was. I don't remember now. I haven't seen it in a while. And they did one of those montages where he's seeing the sights, and they have these flags going by, and you think he's visited all these countries, and he's just in a museum with a bunch of flags. And I just thought that was the big belly laugh for me. That was a clever scene. I don't know that makes a movie, but I thought that was because they were making fun of a cliche.
I didn't want to be like those people that just dismiss it out of hand. So I did I have seen it exactly once. And I paid really close attention when I watched it. I didn't see it in the theater. I waited till it came out on video, and I checked. I remember my dad says, "You don't want to watch Charlie and the Chocolate Factory." And I go, "No, but I should see it, so I can't be sitting there going, oh, this stinks,' without having, you know." And there were moments in it. I didn't like it, because of what you said. That they tried to make it more like the book, but then they had that whole sequence with Christopher Lee. Now I love Christopher Lee, but
Yeah.
that's not in the book, so that should be cut. And I liked it that they went to the squirrels instead of the geese, like in the book. But that part of me is like, so what? It didn't really do anything other than it's closer than the book. Yeah. So that was a disappointment that I didn't expect. Like you said, if Tim Burton is, using his Tim Burton style and all this weird stuff has to happen, it kind of came up kind of short on that end, which is kind of surprising in a weird way. And then of course the big elephant in the room for me and everybody else, and I'll say it, Johnny Depp, not only with the wig, he just looked like a pedophile, and it just looked creepy as hell. And I wish that he looked more like Jack Sparrow
Mm.
as Willy Wonka, because in the original books, the drawings, he has a little tuft of a beard and
Yeah.
mustache, and maybe not act so drunk, but he could have just done basically the same character as Jack Sparrow, and I probably would have enjoyed Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, a few times better. I don't know about a
Yeah.
zillion times, but and that was my big ugh about it, the creepy factor that wasn't supposed to be intentional.
Yeah. I didn't, this is actually the first time I've heard that his performance made people think that, but it's true. His creepiness is different than Gene Wilder's. Uh, um, you know, I don't suffer fools, and I'm not going to suffer you, and I'm going to sass right back to you with some obtuse quote or something to shut you up.
Yeah,
But I'm in charge here. But I'm not going to necessarily, you know, uh, uh, call you out during this tour. But I'm going to say something that makes no sense, or I'm going to slightly embarrass you because you've said something so stupid, or something like that. Gene Wilder never comes across as it comes across as somebody who's about to go mad because it's Gene Wilder. But
yeah.
in some ways, he doesn't seem as threatening
Hmm.
as Johnny Depp does in hindsight, thinking about that. And then thinking about, he started this whole procession of these kabuki like, and that's not fair to compare it to kabuki. So scratch that. But the makeup, the white makeup,
Yeah,
the dazed and confused, floating through the clouds, um, and that's a character kind of thing, because the Mad Hatter was like that.
yeah,
um, and I didn't dislike his performance of the Mad Hatter. It became a Johnny Depp uh, copyright more.
I
It's
like
like,
his Mad Hatter better than his Willy
well,
Wonka.
as Mad Hatter, there was something lovable and childlike and
Yeah,
sweet about Hatter, which I thought was a nice touch, because the Wonderland characters, traditionally aren't all that nice.
no,
So he was, and even in the sequel, which I didn't dislike, in the Looking Glass, there was he made the character compassionate, but it was that's all he started to do after a while, was the pale, dazed thing. And
yeah,
that is, yeah, I can see now. My wife, God bless her, said, we can watch both, but I want the kids to see the original first. So that's the one that
yeah,
they think of as the original. And
yeah,
like you, I don't think you've ever watched the remake again, not for any other reason, but why?
yeah,
I mean, it's just, and I do believe, had that been the original, it would be not as well remembered, not as well regarded. It would be just another odd kids fantasy
yeah.
movie.
And for me, it would be just another Tim Burton misfire,
Yeah,
because Tim Burton's done some great films, and then
yeah,
he's done some films, and this one isn't the worst he's ever done.
it's not
It's not, but
terrible.
it's far from the best. So
No, it's very hard with a remake of something that people have grown so attached to.
Yeah,
And he had an opportunity to make it his own because he's Tim Burton, and I that's where I feel like it didn't go quite. And the same thing with Johnny Depp. He could have created an entirely new character, and yet it was the Johnny Depp being, what he started doing after a while, which just seemed like a go-to. His Barnabas Collins was like that too.
yeah,
They were becoming very, you know, uh, it wasn't like he would amaze you with some new aspect of something, and I don't think it was here. It was he's in it because he's a big star,
yeah.
but not for any reason. Um and it was missing the songs. I'm sorry, but
Yeah, I mean, they did have songs, but they were different songs and just not as
well,
good. So,
they were the poems. That's where they were saying they were being more faithful. They were taking Roald Dahl's poem
yeah,
and which was cool, certainly was cool, and
yeah,
doing all these effects and stuff. Willy Wonka's dated because of that screen treatment, that electric company, Sesame Street screen treatment, but nobody really cares because it's not in it all the way through. It's only in that one sequence, and it also has the film was, I guess, dyed and to make the little things going over the, you know, it's not a miraculous effect, but
right.
it works, and it's all it needed. Here they spent several $1 million, um, and that's where was the how much of that was Johnny Depp's and Tim Burton's, and
Yeah,
just the special effects of having the Oompa Loompas all played by one person.
yeah. The only thing I can say positive about that is that, like meeting Paris Lemon at a show, I met Deep Roy at a show and got his autograph, and he's a very delightful person. And he's,
I'm sure.
I asked him a few questions about it, and he says, it was a challenge, just playing every part, but that's what he was set up to do. So,
And that
and
was a creative touch, having that was what, that was, and the thing about the Oompa Loompas is, speaking of things that are uh, problematic, I always think of Reverend Mother on Flying Nun. She takes off her glasses and she folds her hands on the blotter. You know, that's problematic. You
yeah,
know, what have I done now, Reverend Mother?
yeah,
Sister, the book, the Oompa Loompas were not politically correct in the original book. I remember the illustrations.
yeah,
Uh, I don't have the original book, but those illustrations were changed.
yeah. I have the original book as little pygmies, and then they turned into hippies after the movie came out, and I have that version.
Yeah.
And then they had a completely different artist somewhere along the line do it again, and
Yes.
they're more kind of like in the vein of the hippies, kind of flower children type, in that version too. The Quentin Blake one or whatever is
Yeah.
the
All of
artist
his
there.
Quentin
Yeah,
Blake became his signature artist after a
yeah,
while.
and then yeah, he started drawing for all the Roald Dahl books. So um, but I don't know if you've ever seen the British version. It has different artists, which I don't know. The pygmies look just like African natives. They don't even look like they're short or anything. They just look like slaves. It's really kind of creepy on the very first edition. I don't have one, but I've seen it online, and I go, "Wow." I
Wow, I
think
didn't
they've
know that.
since all been replaced by the Quentin Blake one, but it's like I would love to get a copy of that one, but I think it's quite a few $100s because it's a very rare out of print book now, the original
Mhm.
Charlie British version. So
So everything is spelt with OUR,
yeah,
Kalauer and that kind of thing.
Chocolate.
Yeah. That brings up that whole point of the controversy about 6 months ago, where they were updating the Roald Dahl books
Yeah,
to change things, and it's a question of degrees and how severe the changes are. I think more than whether they need to be done. Those I think those were all overruled because in England, I think because of the devotion to Roald Dahl. Though even in England, his flaws are known. you
Yeah.
know, and he wasn't exactly Mr. Diversity, tolerance, loving everyone either. So I don't think he would have had a problem with the original book.
Yeah.
But you do have to revise things within reason. Just like there's a British version with things spelled one. There's a British version of the Harry Potter books too. You can
Right.
listen to the ones with Brian. What's his the guy who worked with Hugh Laurie? He's terrific, and I can't think of his name.
Well, all I'm thinking is Jim Dale, who did the
Fry, no,
narrations. Yeah.
Stephen Fry. He's
Yeah.
great.
Oh,
Stephen Fry reads them in the British version. Jim Dale, my goodness, how he kept those voices significant. I thought, I know we're getting off it again, but I thought, and with one of the movies, I liked his read better than the movie
yeah.
because he conjured up characters, and I was thinking of that character. So when I saw the movie, it kind of like ruined it for me.
Right.
That's how good he was.
Yeah.
But the Harry Potter books are different because of phrasing and turns of phrases and things like that. When you see a British movie on TCM, put on the closed captioning. Whoever's typing out the captioning, they don't understand the phrases because they get them wrong. You know, I kind of know a little bit about it because I've listened to a lot of albums and watch a lot of British shows and stuff, but it's different. So to say that it's completely sacrosanct, you know, even the Bible gets changed. Church prayer gets changed. To a degree, it's understandable. And I will give the example of Mary Poppins because I remember reading the Mary Poppins with the compass and when they went to the South, and it was, you know, P.L. Travers, good Lord, not the nicest lady in the world and not the most enlightened in the world. So that was, so I can understand with some classics, the way they were wrote, leave it alone because it went back to a period. But when it's a mainstream classic that is still being read again as a new thing, especially kids, young kids, you do have to give some thought to that. I understand the idea, the decisions made and the changes. I'm a writer, so whenever I would get, and so are you, whenever you get the changes back, it's like you would hope that you can defend what you wrote and explain, and then come to a compromise and sometimes say, I get what you're saying, I'll change it. Or they'll say, I get what you're saying, don't change it. You know?
I just wish when they change things, and I don't know about these newer Roald Dahl books, just have a disclaimer saying, we've edited this book since the original version. That's all I ask, you know.
That actually, yeah, that would be, they should do that. Abridged or revised.
And, you know, going off on a tangent again, you know, a 3 years ago when they pulled all those Dr. Seuss books out of print, you know, I think they kind of, you know, should have just left them in print, just made a few art changes or, you know, and just made a few adjustments. But I think the reality on those books is they weren't the top sellers, you know, they didn't pull out Green Eggs and Ham. They didn't pull out Cat in the Hat. They didn't, you know, they still published those. Although they did make an art choice difference on Green Eggs and Ham, but nobody knows about unless you have an original version, a later version. On the original version on Green Eggs and Ham, the guy stooping over the plate kind of has a frowny face, like, you know. And on newer versions, they kind of remove the frown so it's more inquisitive. So he looks like he's just quizzical about it more than actually frowning at it. And that's a big significant change that nobody talks about, you know. And it's like, at first I didn't even notice it until somebody pointed it out. And then I was looking at the covers. Oh my God, they changed it. And, you know, it doesn't say anything about being changed. Nobody talked about it in the news. You know, they just did it, you know. And that, I think, bothers me more than if you change something and say, this has been altered from the original version. You know, that little disclaimer. I love disclaimers on things. So at least I'm aware that somebody's been meddling with it. You know?
Oh yeah. Well, I wrote a lot of advertising with disclaimers, and actually even worked a disclaimer into a song for one radio spot, which I was very proud of. Restrictions apply. But I used to say, why don't we just say may not be so and just be done with it? Instead of putting all of these conditions and saying may not be so, so that we're covered no matter what we say.
Yeah.
None of this may be true. Because, but I agree with you. I think that it's a very hard thing to go with when you're dealing with something that it has to do with who the target is and that kind of thing. Warner has it pretty well worked out to a degree because they have an archive department and they have TCM, and then they have their mainstream. And Jerry Beck has explained this many times. There are properties and titles that fall under the collector, and then the rest fall under the general and family, the Target store, department store titles, and they overlap because now like the Popeyes, they put those Popeyes on Blu-ray, and they were the same Popeyes, and it's kind of surprising that they did. And but they and the Tex Avery's, I mean, they're not as bad, but they're still questionable. The objectification and all of those things,
But they did put disclaimers on those, not in
but
front.
they are for collectors. The Looney Tunes sets have a disclaimer. These are aimed at collectors and do not and then the famous Whoopi quote, at the beginning, which
I mean, that used to bother. It actually used to bother me that they had the disclaimers, and then I changed my opinion completely because I said, if they didn't put the disclaimer, they wouldn't be putting it out at all, or they put it out heavily censored.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly. And there are titles on Disney Plus, and they have a disclaimer first, so they're not putting everything. They're just putting a disclaimer on, and it. We told our kids, you don't say that. You just don't. This is. I don't care when this was. It wasn't. Like Whoopi. It was wrong then, and it's wrong now.
Yeah.
Don't even. No. This is. But you explain it. Well, maybe the disclaimer invites the explanation, and that's fine. But to completely remove it is a whole other story. Find a place where it can go and be accessed, where those who can see it, but not every company has that opportunity, and it's another, that's a bigger question for us to answer here. But I try to be. The reason I bring that up is because there was a big uproar, and there were people starting to call each other names on Facebook and stuff, and it's not new. The books have been revised. This is not new.
Yeah. One that just popped in my head is Eloise. I have the original version that has, you know what I like? Grass. And it was later changed to dandelions. It's not a minor change, but it's like everybody thinks grass is marijuana nowadays. They didn't then, or didn't think so strongly about it, and it's a subtle change. I don't like it that they changed it again without a disclaimer on it, but at least the book's still in print out there,
Mm-hmm.
and if you're savvy like me, you go, I want that original version now. That was uncensored.
And you could seek that out. But the thing is, wouldn't it be a shame if children didn't grow up knowing about and loving Eloise stories? I would, if that's the payoff. Hey, I'd rather it wasn't.
And the worst censor on those is Kate Thompson pulled them all out of circulation except for the first book for about 30 years, until she passed away. So that was probably the worst crime, is she pulled them out of circulation for no reason other than she didn't like
So, and that happens too. A lot of times, because of behind the scenes legal issues, estates, copyrights, all kinds of music rights. That's the biggest one.
Yeah.
Things don't get seen anymore, and they lose a couple of generations. So that it isn't mainstream anymore. It isn't as known anymore, and that's kind of sad.
Yeah.
Anyway,
playing it back to Willy Wonka.
Willy Wonka. I was delighted I did get to meet the kids when they were all with us, and one Oompa Loompa, who was also in Harry Potter. He was the banker.
Is that
and,
Rusty
Goff? Yeah, very nice. They were all very pleasant. I thought Paris Themin was very personable, real easy to to. So was Peter Ostrom. I mean, they were just easy to talk to, and probably the sweetest and nicest person of all was Julie Dawn Cole.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
she
let's show
could
her
not.
book. I'll give a plug for her book. Yeah. She wrote,
Yeah,
I want it now. And there she looks how she looks today. Or close.
she was just delightful, and Denise Nickerson, her heritage of of boomer stuff, baby boomer stuff is huge because she was not only in this, but she was on Dark Shadows,
Right.
and she was one of the Short Circus on Electric Company, all in the, and she was on the Brady Bunch when there were two Peters,
Yep.
the Peter, the nerdy Peter who had, and then he had the split up, you go dance with Denise Nickerson,
Mhm.
um, and I'll go over here, and that was, yeah. So it was like she was in quite a few things, and she was discovered um, at a play at the Coconut Grove Playhouse in Miami, in Coral Gables, in the Coral Gables area, and that led to her. I believe that's how she got on. I think it was Dark Shadows, either Electric Company or Dark Shadows first. I think she
She
left
did
to
Dark
go.
Shadows first, yeah, because she was
Yeah,
really young. She was like 6 or something when
she
she
was
started.
Amy. Yeah,
Yeah,
the Turn of the Screw episodes
yeah.
with the telephone, where Quentin didn't talk and Beth didn't talk for months, probably got paid less because they didn't have speaking roles.
Probably.
That's a whole discussion. Dark Shadows, please don't get me started.
Yeah. So I know I first saw her in Willy Wonka, and then I saw her right afterwards on Electric Company because I think she was on the second year,
She
and
was,
which the first year had Irene Cara blew
yeah,
us strangely enough, and then she left, and I think she was her replacement if I remember correctly, so it's like okay, another person.
yeah. She's not on the cast album. That was the first.
And unfortunately, they're both gone now, and they're both died too young. So
I know. The so many of these '70s people that you associate so closely to it, it's like you didn't think they'd go away. Gilda Radner, I still can't get over because
yeah.
she seemed like the kind of
Well,
person
I
who
mean,
would,
if you make it into your 80s or 90s, you can kind of say, it's like, I think that's kind of happening now. When people in like say Star Wars die, they go, "Oh my God," but it's like you got to remember that film's like almost 50 years old,
yeah,
but in the case of some of these people dying young, and the film's not that old yet, now Willy Wonka's over 50 years old, but it's like, it's just a few more years, come on, it's like,
yeah.
uh,
A couple of other interesting things about it that I've found was the fact that it was shot in Munich in this little studio, and Cabaret was shot right after, to the point where they were like just finishing Willy Wonka, and they were starting to revamp the sets and stuff for Cabaret.
yeah.
And then that I wouldn't even say it's so bad it's good. It's just so disappointing. The Drew Barrymore, A Babes in Toyland TV movie, that was filmed there.
Hmm.
And
Do they
and
still film things there? I don't even know.
I don't know, but I think some of the some, I don't know if any elements of it are left,
Okay.
but I have to wonder again, because it's owned by a great big company, is there some theme park attraction somewhere on Earth in some land where there's a theme park where they've got a Willy Wonka something? Because it's just so begging for a ride.
I don't know. Yeah. I mean, Warner Brothers used to be affiliated with Great America when it was Marriott's Great America way back when, but they've
Yeah,
long since abandoned that. So I don't know if is Warner still involved with Six Flags at this point? I mean, that would be the logical place to put it if they're still involved with that, but maybe they have money problems or something. I don't know.
oh well, Warner does, because they're they just laid off a whole those TCM people, and a lot of these big media companies are having to cut. It was COVID, it was a lot of things, but in the case of Warner, I think uh, they've been bought out 3 times in the last 5 years.
Mhm.
So it's a reorg, another one reorg after another reorg. and so they're different divisions, or it's anybody's guess, and it's anybody's guess if that happens again. So
Yeah.
we it, it it's a changing landscape. But Willy Wonka will all, as I said, and I'm really paraphrasing what Jerry said, the good stuff lasts.
Yeah.
And if you don't like the sequel or the remake or the reimagining, or the TV show based on, the original's not going anywhere. And if it has merit, it's never going to.
Yeah.
The good stuff lasts.
Wanted to say one more thing. I know that was a nice closure, but like I got to finish something. I was like, it popped in my head, and then it popped out. You mentioned Cabaret being shot right afterwards. It's kind of interesting and ironic, since Joel Grey was originally considered
Yeah.
to be Willy Wonka, and then he ends up there playing in Cabaret. Of course, he had already done it on stage, but still, um, it would have
And
been
Joel,
interesting had he done both productions. They would have been back to back in the same studio.
yeah, isn't that something? And Joel Grey physically kind of looked like the illustration, the original illustration. That's why when they picked Gene Wilder, I was like, if they're not going for resemblance here. And I didn't know his range and what he could do at the time, so I just thought it was an interesting and odd choice. But I was a kid too.
Yeah.
Oh, I was going to mention Gene Wilder. The crazier he gets, and the longer the film goes on, the crazier his hair gets.
Oh yeah, I've always noticed that. It's very slick back and everything, and tidy at the beginning of the movie, and then by the end it's black.
Yeah,
My wife has similar hair, and so I will say sometimes when she slept funny and her hair's like that, and I said, "You got the Gene Wilder Willy Wonka hair going on,"
yeah,
and she laughs. She loves the
yeah,
movie. Anyway,
yeah.
all right.
It's funny what endures, and what gets passed along, and this is just one of them that does. I think it's part of the reason is because it says a lot, uh, and it resonates, and it's a cool story. You by the time they go into the factory, you're, even if you've seen it, you're dying to go back.
Yeah.
You know, and
Oh,
so
I should ask you that. What's your favorite scene? That is my favorite scene, when they open it up and show the factory. But
oh yeah, yeah, I do like that. I do.
yeah,
I think that's beautiful. Um, I love the song. I actually wanted to use that song for a Disney spot. Wanted to use the Michael Feinstein version, or at least do it in the way he did it on the album Pure Imagination, because he sings the second verse, which isn't sung in the movie, and it fits Walt Disney World. And so that was the first choice, and we came pretty close. And then ends up that somebody else ended up using it years later. And it's funny because when I presented it, one of the comments was, "Well, that's not a Disney movie," and I'm thinking, Star Wars really originally wasn't either. A lot of
we're
things.
Indiana Jones now.
Yeah, let's not. I said the public isn't gonna mind all that much, I think. And excuse me, but Baroque Hoedown is not
Yeah.
a Disney song, and it's in the Main Street Electrical Parade. We had songs in the parade at Christmas from Scrooge and on stage. So that wasn't the reason they I don't remember what the reason was, but I ended up making up a song
Hmm.
that they used, and it was like, oh, well, use the one I made up. That you know wasn't as good as Pure Imagination, though. That's one of my dad's favorites. Yeah. And Walter Scharf, we should also, not hardly anyone mentions Walter Scharf, and he makes that arrangement with a little tinkle in there. And Walter Scharf also gave us the arrangements for Mr. Magoo's Christmas Carol, which have a lot to do with the emotional impact, the way he uses the strings and stuff. He also did Funny Girl and Journey Back to Oz. And then his career goes all the way back to like not early Hollywood, Golden Age Hollywood, the Martin and Lewis show, a lot of radio shows. So Walter Scharf, and the Willy Wonka score was nominated for an Oscar along with Bedknobs Broomsticks. But I think John Williams that may have been maybe his first Oscar was for Fiddler. That was actually a pretty cool year for musicals. Nobody
Yep,
thinks of
yep.
70
I
as a
know,
big
but yeah, they're all my favorites. I love
yeah.
Fiddler on the Roof, and I do love Bedknobs and Broomsticks and things like that.
So
Since you're a collector of all this stuff, do you have the 7-inch single with picture sleeve of Pure Imagination?
I no, I don't.
Okay.
Of the Gene Wilder version?
Yeah, it's the single off the soundtrack, and it has a picture sleeve. It's the same picture that's on the movie poster and everything, but it's rarer than hen's teeth to find this silly thing. I thought of
Uh,
all people who have rare records and everything like that, you'd have it. But I mean, I've seen it for sale, but it's always like $1,000 or something crazy like that. It's like,
no,
eh, no,
I
okay.
don't have that. What I can point out is that Anthony Newley recorded the demos for Willy Wonka, and they are on a CD now. And if you have the Golden Records version of the songs, they are almost the exact same arrangements. And the Golden Records version, side one, is all of, I think there's 6 songs from it, and that's done by the Rita Williams singers. It doesn't credit them, but those are actually when Golden was doing a lot of British stuff.
Okay.
Uh, and so they're kind of an interesting. And the interesting thing about that is that I Want It Now, which closes side one, there's other verses in that. I want to ride in a fine crystal carriage. I want each day to be spring. And when the time comes to think about marriage, I want a king. That wasn't in the
Hmm.
movie.
Now it makes me wonder. Primus, the group Primus, did a salute to Willy Wonka and did covers of a lot of those songs. I'm wondering now I have to go listen to it again if they did the other verses too or not.
The open of the Golden album has the opening verse to Candyman. I can't stop eating sweets, all those wonderful Willy Wonka treats. You can keep the other. With me, I'm a Wonkerer. When it comes to candy, Willy's the conqueror. And then it goes into Who Can Take a Sunrise.
Hmm.
So a lot of times these are written, and it's also for sheet music and things like that. These are written with verses, and they just don't end up in the movie. Lots of movie songs have, and some TV themes have other. I love finding that kind of stuff
Do you,
out.
do you think? Oh,
Okay.
do you think it might have been shot? Like, you know,
No, it could have been, because when Bill goes, "Who can take a sunrise?" That's a cut. So it's
right?
conceivable that it was. It's conceivable. When he begins it, it's right on the cut.
Yeah,
Um,
interesting.
so
Now,
you
have you seen any outtakes from this film? I mean, other than they show behind the scenes footage, but I've never seen any you know you know goofs and flubs like you typically see. Are those like gone or missing, or they just are so perfect they did perfect at every first take?
I would imagine if there are, I do know just based on those books that the it was a very modestly made film.
Yeah,
The money went into the chocolate room, building the boat, some of the locations and all. But if you look at it scene by scene, it's a modestly made film. Still
yeah,
feels like a movie. It doesn't feel like a TV movie.
yeah. But it seems like
With
there's got to be a scene where like one of them cracked up at something, or
probably,
I forgot my line or something. But I've never seen anything like that. Maybe they were one take Charlies.
well, I don't know. There were children, so there
Yeah.
had to have been some moments like that. But I don't know that
Or
it.
like a special effect gone wrong. Like that one scene where Paris, as Mike TV, is thrown back. And
Yeah,
he's eating the exploding gum, and they might have. Oh, I know an outtake. Actually, I do know a real one. It's actually mentioned in Mel Stewart's book. Is the one where uh, Mike TV's dad says, "Not till you're 12, son." Apparently, that guy couldn't get the one line out, and so there was like 30 takes of him. Not till you're 12, son. Not till you're 12, till he got it right.
yeah.
So that's in the book. But I've never seen that footage, so I don't know if they destroyed it or it's in
Well,
Paramount's vault because they didn't bother handing it over to Warner's or what. What happens to stuff like that? Do you know?
I, you know, for years, Jackie Gleason said the live honeymooners were gone forever and he had them in the vault all the time. So you never know what really
Yeah.
exists or doesn't. But based on the economy of the film and, that it came and went and that it wasn't, if they did have them, it's unlikely, it may be with Walper because
Yeah.
Walper made it. And that was the other thing is Mel Stewart was a director of Cousteau specials. So this was an unusual project for them. So they knew how to shoot a lot of things with economy. So if there are outtakes, they may exist, but it's probably not tons of them. And they didn't save them. Jerry Lewis saved everything. The Get Smart has loads of outtakes because it was a thing to show. If they want, it was a matter of saving them because there was some kind of a use at the end of the season, or they just it wasn't the thing it became.
Yeah.
So it's
I guess
possible.
for kids' films, yeah, definitely. Since it's considered like they did save Star Trek bloopers, but for like the cast party, I guess, and then
Well,
they went
right.
around the circuit, the fan club circuit and everything.
Mary Poppins has a few, just a few with the Slade in it, and there's one with Julie Andrews and Dick Van Dyke lip syncing "Chim Chim Cheree," but they're singing each other's
Oh, I've
sides.
seen that one before. Yeah.
Yeah, there are some things like that, but not a whole lot. But who knows? If they want to sell a new 3D version or something, that they'll probably trot out something.
I have to ask a question, which has nothing to do with this film, but it's a 1971 film, and we have talked about it already. Bedknobs and Broomsticks. I have to ask this because you
Oh,
might actually know.
yeah.
Disney has been notorious for keeping everything for years. And when they tried to restore that film to its full length, they couldn't find everything and they had to recreate things and use photos like the Judy Garland Star is Born and kind of create a sort of full version. You know, how come Disney didn't keep this? What was wrong with them that year?
Well, um, first of all, this is not to say that it may still exist in some box somewhere because Disney's the amount of stuff Disney has from all of those days is enormous and is in various places. So it still could exist. It's just not found. It could be misfiled. A lot of times they'll find a can that says this and it's that, or it's not it's not explained well enough. But one of the most pivotal reasons why is because they didn't even have an archive until 1970 when Dave Smith started it, and he proved that they needed it. So there's no telling. That was only 71. Yeah. And he was, one guy and maybe, a staff of a couple of people. And there's more material than there are people to do it, though there should be more people to do it even now, because now they have Fox, 20th Century Fox material and all the ABC material and they've got everything there. So it's always the case of uncovering, digging through, sorting, filing, finding a way to tabulate what they've got and stuff like that. It could exist, but it has a lot to do with the fact that they save the animation in the morgue, where they save the animation sheets and stuff, and the music, some of the music pieces, but everything, absolutely everything, there's still things remaining to be seen. So it's possible those exist, but again, Bedknobs wasn't the disappointment that Willy Wonka was at the time, but it wasn't Mary Poppins.
Right.
And it wasn't Mary Poppins, and Walt Disney wasn't with us anymore, and that made a difference. So, they cut it, whereas Walt Disney might have said, I don't care what you say, I'm not cutting the movie.
Yeah.
No one had that veto power anymore to do it. Things were done by committee then.
Because I think isn't Happiest Millionaire, which Walt did still work on, even though he passed away before it came out. But they did find all that footage, I think, and restored it, as far as I know.
Soundtrack, not they found the it won't be long. So in fact, Stacia Martin found that. And the soundtrack to the song exists with them singing, but the dialogue is redone.
Ah, okay.
in that sequence. It's so well done, you can't
Yeah, I
tell.
didn't know. I thought it was, like
Yeah,
like even on Bed Knobs and Broomsticks, like they couldn't get Roddy McDowell. I think he'd passed or something, so they had somebody else dub it in, and it's like it doesn't sound like him. Like, yeah.
it's
I think with
very
AI, you could probably do it now. It's like anyway.
maybe you could. It one of the reasons I think that when they put it on Blu-ray, besides the fact that you can kind of tell those sequences don't quite match, they're also not fully color corrected. And I mean, they're corrected as much as they can be, but they're probably not high res. And to bring them up to that standard, maybe they can, maybe they can't. And if they can, it probably would have been expensive. So they pretty much just reissued the film as it was released in 71. Thank goodness they didn't release the one from 79, because
Oh yeah.
that's when I took my parents and I think my brother and his wife. This is one of the best movies, and I love this movie. And almost every song was gone except
Yeah.
Age Leaving and Beautiful Bride. And it's like that was, and it said revised edition in tiny type on the poster. Who knew it was going to be revised negatively?
Yeah.
You know, so that I was very disappointed when they did that. But it's the one I remember is the one that's on Blu-ray, and that's kind of the reason. I think the reason because people were upset. Why didn't they put the entire film? Because it does feel different when you don't see the entire movie and get all that extra dialogue that was in the novelization. It was in the Whitman book.
Yeah.
A lot was in there that's not in the film. And the whole With a Flare with Milt Larson, who we just lost, he's much more prominent in the outtakes. Not well, what ended up being the outtakes. So it's a shame that those kind of decisions were made, but that reflects where Disney was at the time. I think Bedknobs and Broomsticks kind of reflects the what would Walt have done, but we're not going to do it anyway because Walt, we're not Walt, and too many people in a room, too many people with a say. This is what happens when that happens. And the Shermans were not didn't have the same pecking order at the studio after Walt left, because
Well, wasn't that their last film for Disney for quite some time? Yeah,
yeah,
because they went on to do Snoopy Come Home and Charlotte's Web and Tom
well
Sawyer. I'm trying to think of the other things that were all for other studios. So yeah,
they had pretty much. I think they may have come back to do Bedknobs. I think they had, because
yeah.
I
I
know
think they came back at that time too because yeah, they did Chitty Chitty Bang Bang before,
yeah,
and
but
something else. It seems like
there were going to be other musicals and never got made. They were planning other things and
yeah,
they never made. And it was a tough time for the Shermans. One of the things I learned in interviewing some of the Sherman youths was that when they went to Hanna-Barbera for Charlotte's Web, it was nice because they were treated different. They were treated kind of like they were invited in the collaborative process. It was a wonderful experience for them because things weren't the same at Disney anymore.
right.
So, they were adding songs, not just inserting them. They were in the story process, obviously, because the songs are in a very important place, and they were very personal songs. But that's a whole other different discussion because
Yeah,
it's one of my favorite movies. Is that
which one? Bed Knobs
well,
or
both of
Charlotte's
them.
Web? Yeah,
But Charlotte's Web is probably that's I don't care what the limits of the animation was. I wouldn't change a thing. Yeah, I would restore it and make it looks really nice now, but I wouldn't. Somebody once said, "Oh, if they just take the soundtrack and just reanimate it, don't touch it,
yeah.
don't."
No,
I love.
I always liked it. I always liked Charlotte's Web how it looked. It's like I was shocked. I was only 6 years old, but I was shocked that it came from Hanna-Barbera because I didn't think Hanna-Barbera could animate anything in full animation. I just was convinced they
Oh,
could not do it. Yeah,
and the miraculous thing about it is they were almost. I think that was one of the peaks of them being busy.
yeah,
And they still managed to put this together.
yeah,
That's what they still did something of this. So it was like, that's the way I always felt. It's like when they got the chance, they could do some really wonderful things. It's just that time and money and the projects and the the pressures of network whims and the pressure groups and the sponsors and the fact that they didn't own the company after 67.
Yeah.
They were, they were answering to Taft.
Yeah.
There was a lot, they were not Disney. They were a different kind of company, but they did some really wonderful stuff and stuff despite all of the pressures and limitations. That Anne Margrock episode of the Flintstones, Mark Evanier said that had to be first in the season because the oh boy, are we going off story here. Because they wanted it for the season opener so they could publicize it. And it was way down in the program, the list. So they had to accelerate the making of that. What a great and memorable episode. Everybody who knows the Flintstones knows the Anne Margrock episode. And there are still like, well, it doesn't always, well, I would. The fact that they turned that thing out, like, and they would do that, and then they would be expected to continue to do that.
Right.
And I've been in that situation where it's like, now go twice as fast.
Yeah.
And then you perform this miracle, and then down the line, the production people, we're going to ask you to do it again because now you did it.
Right.
So it's no. Yeah. That was a special case, but
it is kind of sad after Charlotte's Web. You'd think that they'd try to do more theatricals. I mean, they did eventually do Heidi's Song, but there was a long gap, and instead churned out a lot more Saturday morning material. It seems like if they kind of reeled that back in, they could have gotten a better theatrical.
It was tough. The 70s was a very, the 70s was a very difficult time for the animation industry. It really, really was. The fact that they could get a feature out at all, you didn't have very many of them, and there were few and far between. And even Disney, they were doing so many. Disney was putting out the classics a lot. That's the thing, is the classics were still viable and still being reissued, and a new one was pretty rare. You only had Robin Hood. Well, you had Aristocats 70, but you basically had Robin Hood and Rescuers,
right?
And then classics in between.
Yeah, and then you got their hybrids, which is Bedknobs and Broomsticks and Pete's Dragon.
And
then a reissue, which is the Winnie the Pooh one, Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh.
So they had that library, and they had the brand, and Hanna-Barbera had their main thing was they wanted to keep the doors open, they wanted to keep it going, they wanted to keep people employed, and they made cartoons. So it's like and so it wasn't like there was that choice of let's do something, they got the opportunity to do Charlotte's Web. It wasn't like they said, oh, we've got to, they wanted to do more features, just like Filmation did. And Filmation did Journey Back to Oz, but that really was a 62 feature that they had to keep working on, and until Archie hit, they couldn't finish it. So that was almost the history of Filmation in one movie. So none of those studios was able to do features. And by the mid 70s, it was near impossible because the industry and the public it just wasn't there. And it's just circumstance. Charlotte's Web is that's again another thing, but there's a whole history of where Charlotte's Web was going to be, and it ended up with Hanna-Barbera. But Barbera still had to do what Walt did with P.L. Travers. He still had to meet E.B. White, and still had to convince him. It was still a sales pitch and to get his approval. But they did not originally set out to make it. It was going to be at least two other studios. I know for sure that Gene Deitch was one of them. But it was not. So things just sort of happen. They just sort of happen. I am sure that they would have loved to do. And I even at the time was thinking, gee, they could probably pull off some features. I think that the closest they came in their minds is when they got the Australian studio. They were doing they took over the Kenner specials and started doing Black Beauty and Gulliver and a few of those serious kind of things, those literature things. And they weren't like Charlotte's Web, but they were an attempt to do, Cyrano was pretty good. That tempted last at the Curlews. They wanted to at least once in a while try to reach a little higher. But it was a struggle because, uh, it always is with the studio. You got prestige products and you have stuff that brings in money. So
Yeah.
that's why. I just, like it shouldn't just be dismissed with it doesn't move good. Paul Winkle didn't move good, but it's one of the
Right,
greatest.
right, right. Bringing it all back to Willy Wonka again, I just quick question. I guess you've already said it was a flop, or a flop enough, the original film, when it first came out. So there was never talk or consideration to make the Great Glass Elevator into a sequel film or anything like that, to your knowledge.
I've never ever heard of any. I'm sure there must have been, and I think there may have been. I would think even maybe the BBC did something, at least on radio, with it, but I've never heard of anything of it. Just the
Yeah.
book on the book read and stuff. The second book is almost like Willy Wonka the series. If it became
Yeah.
a program, because it's two adventures,
Yeah.
and Charlie doesn't have a whole lot to do, and it's like the grandparents and the youth pills. It's like if it was a TV show kind of.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then meeting the president, and the president is kind of a nut who invents things, and he has a cat named Mrs. Taubsy-Puss, and so it's like two episodes in the Willy Wonka show. I don't know why it was never adapted. Maybe, and again, this is a maybe. I know that Roald Dahl pretty much hated the Gene Wilder version, mostly because of what David Seltzer added. He loathed the end line. He didn't like sentimentality.
Yeah.
Read books. So he also hated the witches.
Yeah.
He hated the witches so much that he was going to publicly denounce it. Yeah, that's, I think, in Jim Henson's book. And he was talked out of doing that, but authors, E.B. White didn't like Charlotte's Web, and his wife didn't either. He didn't want it to be a musical. He wanted it to have Mozart in it and stuff. Authors are so close to their books, and I can understand that.
Yeah.
But you can't. It's not the same. A film isn't the same as a book, and there's a lot of people involved.
I always thought Charlotte's Web was pretty darn close, save for the songs.
I know.
I mean, it's like lines of dialogue are just lifted right from the book, and it's like you can't get much closer than that unless you had Garth Williams doing your animation. It's like,
yeah. I get the feeling when I read some of this stuff that they cherry picked the comment and I wondered if there was anything positive that he or his wife had to say, because this guy, being a writer, I mean, maybe they didn't know movies very well and didn't see a lot of movies, but very few movies are verbatim. And Charlotte's Web is almost verbatim out of the book, except for the psychiatrist chapter. Almost every Fern has changed a little bit. She softened a little bit. But most of it is identical. And that's Earl Hamner, because he loved working on that. Yeah. And the song, but he didn't want it to be a musical, and it had the chorus line of chickens. So I think if he did feel that way, maybe he was focusing too much on the songs.
Yeah.
But the songs, taking the songs out, same thing as Willy Wonka. The songs are part of the heart and soul.
Yeah.
But when it's your book, it's hard to imagine how that feels. So
you have to tell these people you should have written a longer book. I don't know. Going back to Harry Potter, well, none of those are musicals, so it's like
no, but
the books keep going.
There's a difference. She had already become powerful.
Yeah.
And so there was no way she wasn't going to get complete and total control over those movies. In fact, I remember when the first one came out, the Chris Columbus directed it, and some of the criticism was it's like slavishly close to the book.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but that has to do with the fact that he wasn't the only director. J.K. Rowling was.
Yeah.
So, that authors usually don't get that kind of influence over a film. And it's it's something when you write a book, you live with it. It becomes part of you. Um,
It's kind of funny going back to Willy Wonka then. Roald Dahl at least was allowed to write the screenplay in the first place, but
yeah,
apparently couldn't do it well enough to Mel Stewart's or everybody's satisfaction, from what I know.
from what I know about Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, that was the case too. I don't know about the Bond film, but I know with Chitty that script was, that's why it says Roald Dahl and Ken Hughes, and God knows if there were other writers, but there was supposed to be an actual Hushabye Mountain that opened up with
Yeah.
a Magic Kingdom inside or whatever. There was a whole lot more, a
There's
lot.
all the James Bond films, except maybe, I don't know, I can't even think of an exception. All of them are like totally off the book. Maybe On Her Majesty's Secret Service might come closest to the book. I don't know. I could be wrong about that too, because I haven't read all of them, and it's been years. So, yeah.
I get the feeling from the way from those films is that he was a good storyteller. He wrote short stories. He wrote children's stories. He didn't really write novels. I don't know that he ever. I mean, he wrote novels for young people, but he never wrote a novel. So writing something like a screenplay, it takes a whole different style of writing.
Yeah.
And also screenplays are frequently rewritten,
Yeah.
usually anonymously. So and somebody like him who was uh, uh, he could be quite he was quite a character. That's usually what you say. He was quite a character.
Yeah.
He could be uh, peppery, I guess you could say. Uh, it's hard to imagine him liking any version of any of his books. I mean, I know when Charlie came out and when James and Giant Peach came out, we were being assured that by the surviving Dahl family that he would have loved it. He would have loved it. But that's like Colonel Klink saying, "I assure you, there's been no escape from Stalag 13." You know,
So, uh,
that. But I thought now there's another. I love James and Giant Peach, and my only issue is they didn't promote it at all. It's
yeah.
like that those issues where somebody made the decision of let's just not promote this much because I would love to see that get embraced because it's a lovely film.
I
And
actually like it better than Nightmare Before Christmas. So it's like, even though I
I
like that film too. But
someday maybe someday we'll find out why that is.
yeah.
Why it just because it's wonderful,
Yeah.
and it has enough of the bizarre to be Roald Dahl, and yet
Yeah.
and that was his first book. It was probably his nicest book
Mhm.
because it isn't as the characters that he meets are very nice to him and helpful to him, and they become friends, and
Mhm.
it has a positive ending.
Mhm.
I thought it was really wonderful. I had a couple of little songs in it,
Mhm.
and it's like, where did it go and why does that happen?
Right.
Why?
Well, let's kind of wrap this up. We're going to talk a long time. We jumped all over the place, but
You're
there's a
gonna cut.
new Wonka movie coming out. Are you anticipating it? What? My dog's getting restless. Look at this. Anyway,
Oh,
there's
trying to make you watch.
what?
I'm
Anyway,
trying,
the new Wonka film. Do you have any thoughts about it, or are you looking forward to it, or?
is this the now? Let me see if I can keep track. There was going to be a Timothy Chalamet one with
I believe
young
so.
Mr. Is
Yeah,
that this one?
that's what I think it is. Yeah, to my
Okay.
knowledge.
I, I don't know. I just watched, as a matter of fact, speaking of him, I just watched the French Dispatch, the Wes Anderson film, and he was in that. And he's an interesting actor, a quirky actor. So he would fit quirky. So it would be interesting seeing him in that role. It's just a matter of it's going to have to be a complete. It isn't Great Glass Elevator. It's, I guess, a prequel or
Yeah,
something.
like which always fills me with dread because a lot of times everybody seems to love origin stories except for me. Like, I really don't care how Darth Vader got to be evil. He's just evil. It's like
Yeah,
that. Even in the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, they had to go back to his childhood and see a psychiatrist, how he became what he was. I don't care. He just is. He is Willy Wonka. It's like,
thank, well,
it's like, I
no,
don't care how the Grinch became the Grinch. I don't care. It's like he was born the Grinch. He was born a full grown adult Grinch.
here's another example. How did the private eye become Inch High? Was he always is his name is Inch High? There just is. Everybody has no problem with that. Doggy. And he solved crime. I mean, even Rankin Bass told you how Thumb got to be because he, but no,
Maybe he
you're
worked.
your own.
Wait a minute. He worked. He
You know,
probably did work for Thumb. Wait a minute. Tom,
he just is.
H-U-M-B. Anyway, all right. Now we're really going off that.
I want to give you one more. Origin thing. My son grew up loving the Paddington stories.
Oh yeah.
And there's a couple of great animated versions. Hanna-Barbera did one in the 80s, but there's also 2 British ones that are quite nice. One is stop motion, really nice. And that's the one he watched. And he was upset. The movie wasn't bad, with Hugh Bonneville.
Yeah.
But what bugged him was they had to explain why he could talk. And, he just can. They find a bear, he can talk. How did Top Cat learn to talk? To Dibble. Did Dibble go find it? Please don't do a story about how Top Cat learned to talk.
Yeah, that'll be the next thing. Or how did all these Hanna-Barbera characters find collars and neckties?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Well, I'll give this much to the Yogi Bear feature, which I finally watched, and it wasn't that bad. There was no, you gave your Ranger Smith's backstory a little bit. He was but not a ton. But there was no, where did Yogi come from? Where did he meet Boo Boo? There was none of that kind of like, let's explain why Yogi can talk and all of that. Maybe that was why it wasn't successful. I don't know. My theory with those films based on established TV shows and stuff, if the show isn't on while the movie's being released, it hurts it.
Yeah.
And when the first Flintstones movie came out, they were blitzing on Cartoon Network. They were running Flintstones constantly.
Right.
When the second one came out, not so much. When Rocky and Bullwinkle came out, you really couldn't find the show.
Yeah.
Unless you've got the support of that. Oh, let's go see the movie because we love watching it on TV. Why did people go to the Simpsons movie? Why do the people go to the SpongeBob movie? It's everywhere. Yeah. So, I mean, that's not a hard and fast rule, but that has a lot to do with it. People want to see it. Anyway.
It's like the Monkees. I mean, once their show went off the air, they stopped having hit records. So it's like,
same with the
weekly advertising.
You have to have the show on, which is why part of the reasons that I think that the Simpsons is that if the Simpsons wasn't on in prime time on Sunday nights, where everybody's used to seeing it, the merchandise and the brand there would be a percentage lost.
Mm-hmm.
The show sells the stuff. I mean, it just does. It's on, and if it wasn't on, it wouldn't be in the public mindset. It's like having Johnny Carson every night, or having, now we've lost Johnny Carson. He was ubiquitous. Same with Regis Philbin. He was ubiquitous, and then it's like, how much Regis Philbin merchandise is selling now? I miss Regis. We'll talk sometime about Regis. He was very nice.
All right.
Like Jerry, he was nice to me.
All right. Well, Dougie has to go, I think, so that probably means we got to wrap this up. I guess I will ask you this about yourself, and you can do a little plug, and then we'll wrap it up. You mentioned one book you're working on, Hanna-Barbera. Are you working on any other things that you can discuss? And
working on things I can't discuss, but that's the main thing. That's the main thing I'm working on is, and that'll be out early next year. It's called Hanna-Barbera: The Recorded History. from the modern Stone Age to meddling kids.
Cool.
Tells the story of Hanna-Barbera all the way back in the from the early days of their partnership, all the way up to the Tom and Jerry movie in 2021. So it goes from Tom and Jerry to Tom and Jerry, told through the lens of their recordings, because it's an area of Hanna-Barbera. I mean, I was surprised how much wasn't all put in one book when I started writing it.
Yeah.
And so the material I found and learned, it's like, wow, I got to put this in. I'm still finding things. I mean, the books at the here, and I'm still finding things. But the area that is least known about them is that they were making records based on their properties almost from the beginning.
Yeah.
And there's still stuff coming out, including the soundtrack to Scoob, 2 soundtracks to Scoob,
Yeah.
and one for Tom and Jerry. So there's still a viable brand as far as audio goes, but that's the area I know really well, and it's going to have the full discography, as much as I can find, because I'm still learning. And, it's like, oh, like you mentioned the Willy Wonka single. It's like, I still find stuff on eBay. Ooh, I got to put that in.
Singles
So
are always the weirdest things. It's like you
but
think,
those are the
like a
rarest.
Banana Splits album. Isn't that enough? No, they had a bunch of singles. It's like Noogie Cats had a single. It's like.
And there are some of their singles I haven't found, especially the very last ones they did, but I have all their albums from their label, and it's just their label alone would have been a book, but I thought, well, that's a little too that's too obscure, but it's a cool story. But let's just do everything,
right,
from beginning to end, and so it involves a lot of interesting people and a lot of interviews, and I'm very, very, very excited about it because I love those records.
And who's publishing it?
University Press of Mississippi, same as Mouse Tracks, the Walt Disney.
Okay.
Mouse Tracks was about an area of the company, again, that people didn't know about, but most people knew the story of Walt Disney and his brother and all that stuff. Hanna-Barbera story has been largely obscured over the years. I mean, there's the 2 biographies, but most of the books have been beautiful books with some history in them. There hasn't been really a book that just tells the story.
Right.
And that's a cool story because, as we discussed, they were innovative. They did some astonishingly great stuff at MGM that isn't talked about enough. And they did innovate, create, and give the entertainment industry things that they're still using. There wouldn't really be Simpsons. I think you could ask anyone connected with the Simpsons and say, without the Flintstones, there wouldn't have been the Simpsons. Yeah. And the stars were aligned perfect for the Simpsons, and that's why it's still on. But that's a whole other discussion too. Why is the Simpsons still on? Oh, and why did it stay on?
Right.
The network television changed, and television changed, and like they had to go to Saturday morning, where you have to go where the demand is. So that's kind of what happened to them. But it's fascinating, and it's a lot of great people. It's a lot of talented people. I mean, when you look at when people are showing artwork on Facebook, some of the artists are still with us, or sons, daughters of the artists, and they'll post like backgrounds and stuff. You take for granted because it goes by on the screen and all, or just watching some of the Blu-rays, the Space Ghost Blu-ray. I mean, some of that art is when you see it in the colors it's supposed to be in, it's like, wow, this looks really nice. It was a substantial contributor to our culture.
All right. Well, thank you, Greg, for being on my show again. And if you want to reach out to talk to you about Willy Wonka or Hanna-Barbera or anything else about movie music or anything else, how do people get in contact with you?
Well, I have a website, gregehrbar.com or gregovision.com. You can reach me there. And I'm also on Facebook. So you can also either, if you're not a friend, you can always message and that kind of thing. So please stop by.
All right. Well, thank you again, Greg Ehrbar, for being my special guest on Fun Ideas Podcast. And we will see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.